All right, everyone. The voice of college football in session. We appreciate you stopping by here for a urgent, uh, impromptu live stream session here on a Thursday morning. And again, we appreciate you stopping by. Your comments and questions are welcome. We're going to get right to it. No big introduction in regards to the state of the ACC. Of course, we've covered that at length for months and months and months. Check out the live streams and check out the videos. We will not set you up right now because we want to honor the time of our first guest. We've got Bill Bender stepping in from the Sporting News. And so we'll get right to Bill. Bill joined us a couple of weeks ago to break down a possible Super League. And of course, this could all factor into that as well. So, Bill, I appreciate you taking the late offer here and invite to join us here at the Voice of College Football. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well. We had a couple kids over last night, so I was shuttling a few out and in and out before we came on here today, but got your tweet this morning. Obviously, the rumors that are going around, when the rumors start, you can't dismiss them, right? Because we've seen the last 2 summers how quickly things can move. And, it'll be interesting to see what these rumors turn out to be, especially because it seems like we're trying to parse out the entire ACC before anything even happens.
So, Bill, it's been my thought that once Florida State and Clemson took the ACC to court, usually parties don't come back from that type of path. Once they go down that path, they are gone. They have, regardless of what the conclusion of that in regards to financial agreement, how long it takes, how the battle ensues, how many years, all of that, that Florida State and Clemson were gone and the ACC would never be the same. Now, whether the ACC could fortify itself, of course, from a quantity standpoint, they've got 17 members, so they could withstand that from a quantity standpoint. But whether that would continue to implode from there or they would be able to save themselves, much like the Big 12 did with 4 additions after Oklahoma and Texas, that's what I held in question. Now, the latest gauntlet that was laid down was by the North Carolina administration, athletic director in particular, about a month ago at the ACC meetings to say, hey, we need out of this. We're not making enough. We can't keep up.
Right. And then last week, the news of, the Big 12 is what to watch to me, because how competitive, if it's survival in a Darwinist model, where the SEC and the Big 10 are doing well and they're not going anywhere, does it become a back and forth between the ACC and the Big 12? The reported rumor that the Big 12 would target, Miami and Louisville under the right circumstances is what that said. It's interesting because the Big 12 has been very proactive, very aggressive. The story last week about it possibly being called the Big 12 presented by Allstate or the Allstate 12, whatever you want to call it, they're not interested in settling. Whereas the future, like you said, ever since Florida State and that lawsuit, they could stay, but the relationship's not the same. And a lot of it's driven by revenue because Florida State and Clemson, 2 programs that had a lot of success in the college football playoff era, aren't making as much money as Florida and South Carolina. They're in-state rivals. I think it's really as simple as that. They need more money to compete in this new model.
Some Big 12 fans aren't necessarily happy with me because I've just painted the picture of second-class status. However, I have credited many times Brett Yormark and also the former commissioner in regards to making what I thought were the best moves possible at the time to fortify the league once Oklahoma and Texas left. And then since then, they're trying to make up a revenue gap with what you just mentioned, which seems ridiculous to a lot of people if they would give up rights or naming rights to the league or hand it over to a sponsorship. But that's where we seem to be headed in college football. We will be probably seeing more stadiums being named by sponsors and logos on the field and the whole deal. But the Big 12 seems to have countered the Big 10 and the SEC, the value proposition for the quantity proposition of let's go out and get territory and try to keep up that way. And also the basketball angle. And I know they haven't followed through on this, but Brett Yormark has been pretty upfront about the option of going after Gonzaga, Connecticut from the basketball value. And why not be the best basketball conference in the nation if you can't be the best football conference?
Right. And second class is one way of putting it. The other way I would put it is the Big 12 is the perfect example of alternate programming. If you're not into, is it going to make more revenue and money and prestige than those SEC and Big 10 conference football games? No, it's not going to drive more ratings. But when you talk about the Big 12 for this year example, I can't tell you who's going to win the conference. We could go back and forth and probably go through eight teams in that conference and make a case that they could win the Big 12. I think it's going to be entertaining. I think Brent Yormark's done a good job of, trying to make it cool. I don't know what cool is. I'm 45. I'm past the stage of being cool, but he's trying to make it more marketable for younger fans. And I've kind of always used the CW analogy in terms of TV. When we watch TV, as like there were plenty of young people when I was that age that went to that, and it was alternate programming and it worked. And I think that's what they're going for. And to your point, best basketball conference in the country. So you keep building on that, you keep using that, and they'll be around. So if you're the ACC, can you believe you and I are sitting here right now saying the Big 12 is the best basketball conference and the ACC isn't? I mean, that's a red flag to me as well.
And it's kind of ironic that the Big 12, and again, some fans will take exception to this, but I mean it in all sincerity, and just that's how I see it, is that it's been spared in a sense by its mediocrity. Because once the SEC and the Big 10 went to war, and this punch counter punch process of evaluating programs out there just wasn't anyone in the Big 12 that served either one of those conferences from that standpoint, while the ACC may be a weaker conference and is much more vulnerable at this position, obviously, had those couple top tier level programs that if those got picked off, and it certainly appears as though they will be because they are kicking and screaming their way out, that the ACC is vulnerable while the Big 12 has safeguarded itself. And again, I credit the league much like you do, positioning itself in a really good way. And to your point, before I let you expound on that, would be that it to me, I love college football. I don't have to be watching the top two teams in the country to be satisfied with a matchup of Kansas State and Iowa State just playing a fun football game, a couple 7-3 football teams. So I enjoy the sport, and I enjoy what used to be the fabric of the regionality and all of that. So I would hate to see anything happen to the Big 12. And to your point, just about anybody can beat anyone else. And there has to be some quality given to that, because that's just an entertaining product.
Well, and the ACC, I want to be clear, I don't want to see the ACC go away. There's too much
Absolutely.
history. There's too much. I get where Florida State and Clemson are coming from. I understand that, being the in-state rival. I lived in the Carolinas for a while. The Clemson South Carolina dynamic was always so interesting to me, because South Carolina was the larger program, even if Clemson, especially in the playoff era, was the more successful one. I would make the argument that Florida State, right now, it's wild to think that none of the above out of Florida State, Florida, and Miami are really a superpower in college football. And some of that has been because of Alabama and Georgia. So they're looking for opportunities. I've always thought, and talking to people too, I don't think Florida State's a slam dunk to go to the SEC if they were to leave the ACC. I think the Big Ten would take a hard look at them. And they should. You'd get in Florida market. It would make sense in some ways for that to happen. So, I always say to my editor, the only thing we like talking about more than the season this time of year is realignment. And it still hasn't gone away. I think that once that wheel just turns a little bit, and when you brought me on today to talk about this, you start thinking, the wheels in your head start turning that this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. And it goes back to the conversation we had a few weeks ago about that Super League stuff. When people say that'll never happen, all it takes is a couple more turns of this wheel and it could.
And Bill, I'm right there with you. I don't want to see anyone get left out. And we had this conversation, the two of us, and then our conversation sparked a lot of comments that came in later. And I've had conversations with college football fans, and I've been a bit surprised by how many seem, based on our audience, seem to say, you know what? Boston College is not competitive. Wake Forest is not competitive. Stanford's not. Leave them out. We don't want to see them play football at this level. We want to see the top 32, the top 40 play. I'm not in that category. I can sit down and watch Boston College and Syracuse play and be entertained by a football game and think, I understand it has no championship implications, but there is history there. So I don't want any of it to go away. The schools that intrigue me, Bill, in all this, Clemson, Florida State. I tend to believe that Florida State is actually a Big Ten lean. I think that's what they want. I think Clemson is a heavier SEC lean. Miami's going to be fine. North Carolina is going to be fine. The more I hear, I think Virginia is going to be fine. I'm concerned about Wake, Boston College, Syracuse. Then there's this middle tier. Louisville, you mentioned a few minutes ago, NC State, that have football that's very important to them. They've got a decent brand. They bring 7 or 8 wins to the table every year, a decent audience. As we discussed with Louisville in particular, I'm intrigued about what's going to happen if they're going to get plucked up by the Big Two or probably drop off, or maybe an NC State could attach themselves to a North Carolina and get into one of the Power Two.
Right. And like, I watch a lot of History Channel. So when I saw that report, it's like parsing up all these countries that like we did at the end of World War II. Not a perfect analogy, but you get what I'm saying. So to me, North Carolina is really interesting too. They're the one school that I could see them being attracted to the Big Ten, or the Big Ten being attracted to them because of the money, the jump man, all the things that they bring from a cross-brand perspective. But they have a history in the South, right? Like, and that's something. How much regionality are we factoring in? Because the South and the ACC and the SEC in particular, they're really into being from the South. You notice that's probably the most regional conference we have right now. Both of them. The ACC, maybe, I know they go up that way, all the way up the coast. And I would be most worried about the old Big East schools. You know what I say? Like Boston College, Pitt, West Virginia. Where do they fit? Do they find a home in this realignment shuffle? Would the Big Ten ever open its doors to Pitt and West Virginia? I've asked that question a million times, and there just doesn't seem to be an interest in it. There's interest for me as a Southeast Ohio kid, would like to see Ohio State and Penn State and Pitt and West Virginia play. But I'm not sure the Big Ten execs are worried about what the Southeast Ohio kids think.
And I also have to think that North Carolina is an interesting decision in all of this as well, because while college football fans focus on Florida State and Clemson, and as you've mentioned, of course, they have been the best football playing schools for a long, long time. When you talk about North Carolina challenging the ACC, when they speak out, they're at the very heart of what this conference has been. Right. They're the league office. They are, if you could select one school and say, this is the ACC, it would be the University of North Carolina.
Yeah. I mean, when I lived in Charlotte, that's from the basketball standpoint. They run the show, not run the show so much as, they're the most prestigious brand, in my opinion. We could say Duke and North Carolina combined on the basketball side. That's the first thing I think of. When you say ACC out loud, first thing that comes to mind for me is Duke, North Carolina basketball. North Carolina probably first. And if there's Duke listeners on here, they're going to hate that. But that's just from living down there. I thought the same way. From a football standpoint, it would be Florida State, who I understand is not a historical all the way back member of the conference. But at the same time, when you think ACC football, you think of that dominant run with Bobby Bowden. You think of, even with Jimbo and what they brought to the conference. I think it goes through Florida State on the football side, which that relationship, it will be interesting to see. When media days roll around, that's one of the storylines, probably not going to get a ton of pub today, but I'm really interested to see what Florida State says. And if anything comes out of media day and that relationship between conference and Florida State, Phillips is probably going to have to come out and take a hard stance on where the conference stands. But I'm a little bit worried about it, but at the same time, I'm still rooting for the ACC to succeed.
Bill Bender's here, Sporting News. Please check out his work there. You see the Twitter/X handle down there for both Sporting News and Bill Bender. Bill, jump off at any point. We love the conversation and we'll continue it, but I know you've got some obligations. Bill, you mentioned regionality and that North Carolina is a Southern school. Of course, for them to be in the Big Ten, and we mentioned Florida State in the, it's pretty common to college football fans now to talk about teams traveling across the country and it not being, if we would have had this conversation 10 or 15 years ago and talked about Florida State going to the Big Ten, and people would have thought, what are you talking about? They don't fit in the Big Ten and this team doesn't fit here, but
Right.
we've got Stanford and Cal in the ACC at this point.
Right. And it's, I think we talked about this last time it came on. It's just, for me, the curiosity factor is off the charts this year of how does this work? How do I feel? And yeah, it's a little selfish. How do I feel sitting down and watching Wake Forest play Cal or SMU play NC State? Do I really feel like the same? And how do I feel about watching a 12-team playoff and 18-team conferences? I'm excited. Part of me is still excited, though, because it comes down to those games, the uniforms, the pageantry. I think some of it's still there. But, if we're being honest, and I always ask that, how honest are you? Do I watch a ton of ACC football on a Saturday when there are heavy lifting games between the Big Ten and SEC? Probably not. That's also, I'm curious to how I will treat that. The one thing the Pac-12 had, and now the Big Ten will have on some level, is that late night window. I'm always watching that late night window, and that's where you find those games that maybe aren't as big, and who capitalizes on that. Maybe that's why that I'll be sitting there and watching more Stanford and Cal than I'm letting on.
And that's why I think going back now 20, 25 years, the ACC may have been the first, based on my recollection, out of the power conferences to say, hey, we're going to start playing some Thursday and Friday games.
Right.
A lot of NC State on Thursday and Friday night, those kind of schools. Bill, we appreciate you being here. Check out Bill's work at Sporting News. Bill, thank you so much for answering the call and jumping in here to provide some insight.
Hey, that was a lot of fun. I look forward to talking to you here, hopefully in a couple of weeks as we get into Media Day. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Have a good day, Bill.
Take care.
Bill Bender, Sporting News. We recommend you head on over to Sporting News. Check out Bill's work. You see his X handle right there. I am not Bill Bender. There we go. Mark Rogers, MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Appreciate you stopping by. We will take your comments and questions there in the chat. We have a number of other media guests that we believe will be stopping by when we send out the alert. A lot of people are obviously caught in their schedule, their day, their calendar, and aren't able to stop by. But we thought it important to jump on here and discuss a possible imminent doom for the ACC. So my perspective generally, and we've talked about this, of course, if you go to the Florida State channel in particular, you will find discussion and analysis about this forever, endlessly. You could spend days and weeks. Florida State channel, Clemson channel, to an extent, the Miami channel, and of course, right here. So my basic thoughts, as I mentioned to Bill, would be that as soon as Clemson and Florida State took the ACC to court, there is no turning back from that. The only question was, how long is this going to take? Is this going to go to its conclusion? Are they actually going to go to a court case and have a judge have to determine the grant of rights and have it go all the way through the entire process? Or more likely, as I've predicted for a long time, and I am in no way a legal expert, I am not a legally knowledge person, regardless, even down the rungs. But settlement. There's going to be a settlement, is my heavy prediction, and it has been for a long time. A settlement between Florida State and the ACC, between Clemson and the ACC. And it was a matter of the ACC holding on to those two commodities for as long as possible to give themselves time to work other angles, to work other channels, to, of course, gain revenue from those two schools and those two football programs. And then also just fighting for every last dollar to not have to relinquish, in Florida State and Clemson's case, relinquish the ridiculous amounts of money that were on the table first and foremost when you add up the exit fee and when you add up the both the exit fee and then add up, of course, the monetary damages claimed by the ACC with the early exit of those schools and their TV rights. And it was taking that figure into the $800 million range for each school. I in no way expect that to be the final destination of the buyout for either one of these schools. And the ACC is having to fight this on two fronts in four different places. So in a sense, four different fronts. And if you know your military history, that is typically not a path to victory. The more fronts you open up, obviously, the more you have to parcel out your resources that become sparse. Your resources become, and then also in this case, there's a situation in which there is information and argument tracking that needs to take place. Meaning, if your argument is such in this court case concerning Florida State in the state of Florida, then you better well be consistent across the board when you're dealing with Clemson in South Carolina, Clemson in the court case in North Carolina, and Florida State in the court case in North Carolina. So two different legal battles waged in four different states or four different cases in the two states, because the ACC wants this to take place in North Carolina, and that's where they filed suit. And of course, Florida State filed in Florida and Clemson in South Carolina. So you have to keep track of all of that, and you have to make sure that you're consistent and that your arguments are consistent. And if Clemson's able to poke a hole over here, then Florida State can pick up on that and say, we're going to add that to our case. Okay. And then Clemson, of course, can take from what Florida State was able to gain as an advantage and add that to their case. So it becomes more and more difficult as you add fronts and arguments to this for the ACC. We got a call coming in from our guy, Talk is Pitt. Reached out to our guy here to jump on and talk some Pitt football and, of course, this ACC mess. What's going on today?
Not much. Just sitting outside in this muggy heat in Pittsburgh.
Okay. Well, it looks bright and sunny, if nothing else.
Oh, it is. It's already 90 degrees here.
Yeah, I think it's about 90 degrees everywhere at this point. I just think that's what it is. So how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Just soaking in some new recruiting news that Pitt got recently. Got one of Penn State's legacy players, Sean Lee Jr. His dad played for Penn State, so I'm rubbing it in their face right now.
That's a good feeling. Yeah, Sean Lee could play. Absolutely. Dallas Cowboys.
Not that Sean Lee. There's a Sean Lee. Yeah, there's a second one. He played DB Lee back in the 90s.
Okay, I'm sure I watched him play many times as well. It doesn't come to mind. What do you think about this ACC realignment situation?
Honestly, as far as it pertains to the conference as a whole, I don't see as far as a collapse happening anytime soon. I do some adding a couple more teams before that were to happen. Like, I do truly believe Florida State, Clemson, and Miami are on their way out the door. I think they're going to do everything they can to leave the ACC, which is why I think the ACC went and grabbed SMU, Cal, and Stanford. And once they leave, I think they're going to end up going and grabbing more. But this is honestly, you have nobody to blame but the ACC and everybody else who signed the deal. It was a horrible deal from the start. It's an even worse deal now. So it's gotten so out of control, and I don't think NIL helped at all. I actually think NIL sped up the process.
Well, focus specifically on Pitt. Where do you think their destination lies?
The Big 12. I'm not saying we don't have a chance at going to the Big Ten. However, me being, I don't want to say a realist, but me seeing the writing on the wall, we probably wouldn't fare well in the Big Ten. We would be at the bottom of the Big Ten. I don't think we're at that kind of level as far as Big Ten goes, being competitive. But the Big 12 is where half of the teams we have played consistently, West Virginia, Cincinnati, UCF, they're all there, and creating natural rivalries with those three teams and bringing the backyard brawl back to a conference rivalry is where I think Pitt will end up. I think the Big 12 would be dumb not to take us.
I would agree. And I think it's very much in the Big 12's MO and what they've displayed here since Oklahoma and Texas left, that they want to scarf up programs that are solid, that are strong, that have their fan bases, that are not weaklings by any stretch, but they're not the elite, but it's in that Arizona State, Colorado, Utah realm. And certainly they've already attached, of course, West Virginia and Cincinnati, rivals. They've got them right there. No, Cincinnati's not necessarily a rival, but there's a Big East connection. And obviously the drive's only, 2.5, 3 hours?
Yeah.
So there you go. It's a rivalry that's budding. And West Virginia, of course, you get the backyard brawl and you add a high ticket, high volume TV draw to the conference and make it a conference game. I think that's a big plus for the Big 12. Yep.
I agree. I'm not 100% sure why we didn't go to the Big 12 in the first place. If I'm not mistaken, though, I did read that we were very, very close to doing so. But so were a lot of other teams, like TCU, I read, was poised to go to the Big 12 until they not the Big 12, the ACC, until they backed out of the deal. And a couple other teams were poised to go to the ACC until they also backed out, because I think the Big 12 just offered them more money. Or maybe TCU and the other teams saw something that might happen down the line with all this conference realignment, like the ACC might collapse. And honestly, it's starting to look that way. I didn't believe it last year. I didn't think the ACC was nowhere near close to collapsing, but I think it's been sped up quite a bit. And I agree with whoever's comment that is ACC and Big 12 should join forces. I agree, because I don't think we're going to get a lot of teams with guaranteed spots or just guaranteed spots in the college football playoff as the Big 10 and the SEC will. I think if the ACC and Big 12 join forces, then that would complete it.
All right, Talkers Pitt, appreciate you being here. Have a great day. Get into some AC, and we will talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Voice of College Football breaking down this situation concerning the ACC, and we've been talking about it for over a year at this point, but seems to be a little bit more imminent based on a few different factors. Can't wait to get the perspective from Corey Smith from Pack Pride. That's 247 Sports, NC State, folks. How you doing today, Corey?
Doing well, Mark. Hope you are.
Appreciate you answering the call. I know it's a late invite, but thanks for joining in, because I made the comment to Bill Bender of Sporting News just a minute ago that NC State intrigues me along with Louisville as that second tier in the conference, but maybe NC State a little bit more because there's an attachment, of course, to North Carolina being football playing, basketball playing, of course, as well. Rivals, but that last weekend of the season, of course, is just set in stone in the ACC. So can they make, maybe even if they're not coveted by the SEC and or the Big Ten, do they make an attachment deal much like UCLA did with USC and they go along with North Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one of two ways that could go, and I've talked about it a couple of times this offseason. Things that I've been hearing since basically all this was triggered at the beginning of last football season for the ACC when they added, SMU, Stanford, and Cal, started the wheels in motion essentially, is the fact that, for an NC State, for UNC, it's likely either they partner together and go to the same place, or they essentially strike a deal with the teams from Virginia, or, even, I don't know, like, for Clemson. The issue is there's not multiple teams in South Carolina. There's multiple teams in Florida, but more than likely those aren't, direct ties, because Florida State and Miami were both late additions to the ACC. Whereas I think a lot of the schools that are regionally connected to each other, NC State, UNC, and then obviously Virginia Tech, they would all like to, end up kind of in similar situations. So what I've heard for a while is if NC State and UNC don't go with each other to, say, the SEC or the Big Ten, or I don't know, even the Big 12, if that conference does strengthen a little bit more this upcoming year, is the fact that, if they don't stick in the ACC, that they could end up kind of breaking apart from each other and going along with the teams from Virginia. So if you see maybe a NC State and Virginia Tech go to the go to the SEC, and then you see, UVA and UNC go to the Big Ten. Those would be more natural fits for the two of them, kind of more brand fits, I guess, for the conferences. And it could end up leading to them still being able to keep those, long-standing rivalries together, because for UNC and UVA, they've had one of the longest played rivalries in the entire country. And then obviously UNC and NC State, both closely connected to each other. They would like to continue playing that. So even if they're in separate conferences, be able to keep that alive, similar to what the SEC and ACC have been able to do over the years.
So is that what we believe to be an administration lean, or is that media talking, or what do the fans seem to want?
I think it's more of kind of like I don't know, like maybe a second type of option there. I think state-wise, I think as far as, administration, first of all, they'd love to see the ACC continue to stay intact. That would be ideal because you wouldn't have to go anywhere, but that would end up leaving, essentially you have to have more money. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. The ACC has to find ways to get more money. You have to find ways to get bigger contracts. Whereas, I think for the fans, it's just, hey, let's keep this rivalry alive however possible. Doesn't really matter where you end up as long as both teams are in great positions. So I think, the fan bases would like to see the two of them stick together. But, if you're UNC, you just want to go to the best conference possible. If you're NC State, you just want to go to the best conference possible and try to keep that rivalry together however possible.
So when you bring up the Big 12 to NC State fans, are they just hoping for the best and don't want to hear that right now?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the Big 12 is an option if the ACC does implode, if, the stuff with Florida State, Clemson, and even UNC kind of being tied in there as well. If something were to happen there, then I think the Big 12 might be an option. But if you're NC State, if you're UNC, if you're Florida State, if you're Miami, you're looking at the Big 12 going, all right, the only way that happens is there's a large package deal from the ACC to go there. So if you get, 4 of the strongest teams from the ACC to all head there at the same time, then you feel like, all right, this actually bolsters what the Big 12 is trying to do in comparison to kind of where the Big 12 is right now, which is, there's not a ton of large, media market teams, I guess, is what you're looking at right now.
Corey, I would say, and we would like everyone to, of course, check out Corey's work at 247 Sports at Pack Pride, as you see on the banner there. I don't think that the perception of NC State football is hardly any different today than it was like 5 years ago. But if you really grind the numbers, and folks, we're going to release a video here today. Dark horses for the college football playoff. There's a certain team on there that is in the conversation like we're discussing with Corey right now. So there's a hint right there. because you figure NC State, they go 7-5, 8-4 every year, but 21-35 was Dave Doran's start in the ACC. He's 23-11 in the conference. That's a huge turnaround over the last couple of seasons. So it's a much stronger football program, I think, than people realize as compared to 7-8 years ago at Dave Doran's the beginning of his tenure. So putting that football status together, coming off 9-4 with the TV market brand and how many eyeballs are drawn by NC State football, where would you categorize NC State?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I still don't think they're in a great position overall, but this upcoming year is essentially their opportunity to do what they tried to do back in 2022. You know, the whole build up to 2022 was Devin Leary's coming back. You've got a ton of the offense remaining. You've got a lot of defensive players coming back and some key injuries. You know, obviously Devin Leary going down for the season after, I believe, 5 games that year. You lose Peyton Wilson, who we now know, an elite linebacker, just came off the Bednarik Award, Defensive Player of the Year award as well, and the Dick Butkus Award. But then you look at where things kind of stand. Where things kind of stand for NC State going into this year is, hey, you've got to be able to, essentially use what you've been able to build this offseason and finally put it all together. Because you look back at 2022, they missed that opportunity. Yes, they still finished with 8 wins that year, but that was with 4 different quarterbacks because you had several injuries, like I said, at key positions. So you're looking at what you want to try to do to put together this upcoming season. And this is the chance to essentially put yourself in that discussion as, a strong team overall in the country, not just in the ACC. Yes, you look back 2017, 2018, 2021, and 2023, they were able to win 9 games, but never quite break through for that 10th win. If they're able to do that this season and put themselves, as you said, in that discussion for the college football playoff, put themselves in the discussion to win an ACC championship game, that truly vaults you into a different, spectrum. Basketball has already been able to do it. Baseball, obviously, just reaching the College World Series. From a strength standpoint across the program, they're there, but they really need football, which is obviously the driver of all of this, to really get to that point.
Might surprise some people out there. We just ran all-time program rankings and looked at every conceivable category. NC State, for as good as they've been in football and consistently, a decent football program since I started watching back in the 80s, has never finished in the top 10 in the country. I don't think most people would believe that it's never happened.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where you're missing right now is as much as you've helped yourself and being able to kind of, get yourself in those discussions, they haven't been able to finish the job and get themselves there. So that's where you want to get to this season.
Corey, would love to have you back. We're focused, of course, on the realignment situation today, but to have you back to talk more specifically about 2024 recruiting and everything going on at NC State.
Yes, sir. Just let me know when.
Thanks, Corey. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Corey Smith, Pack Pride. Let's transition to the Florida State angle. Always enjoy the conversation with Chris Frazier from Spearatics. Head on over to Spearatics as soon as we get done here. Check out Chris's work. Chris, what's going on today?
Oh, it's just another fun day in Tallahassee. We got a Board of Trustees meeting today.
Well, let's hear about that, because what we're hearing rumored across college football in regards to the ACC in recent days, Florida State's way ahead of the curve. We know they're gone. We know that they've got their thing going. So let's focus specifically on this latest in court with Florida State and what's going on there.
It was important because, Judge Cooper, it was more of a meeting more so than it was an actual hearing. But he took about 8 hours to explain why he decided not to dismiss the case as far as like he did previous. But he didn't do it with prejudice. So therefore, Florida State had the opportunity, therefore its lawyers had the opportunity to, file an amendment, basically get their ducks in a row. The argument needed to stand better than what they had on paper. So they did so. And then Judge Cooper ruled that basically jurisdiction, whereas that's been the biggest back and forth between Florida State and the ACC because the ACC filed in North Carolina. They claim that North Carolina is where this needs to be. Florida State says it's not. It needs to be in the state of Florida. Judge Cooper agreeing with Florida State. Now you have merit behind your story because he, being an honorable judge, stating that yes, the jurisdiction part was a problem. It does not need to be in North Carolina. It needs to be in the state of Florida because that's where the business is coming from. We're talking about home games. That's where the ACC makes their money from, Florida State, and you're making money in the state of Florida. So it's pretty simple that this should be considered a situation in the state of Florida. What's funny to me is, and this is just to add a point, no one talks about the ACC almost relocating to Orlando, Florida a few years back. They were going to move from North Carolina all in totality and then move to Orlando, which would have made it a lot easier for us at this point. But we're back to ground zero here in the state of Florida, basically starting over. But it's the jurisdiction part of it matters. What I will say is what's going on in the courts matter. But it's the conversations behind the doors, the communication between Florida State and the ACC's lawyers outside of this. That's what's really going on. The work's being done outside the courtroom. Very, how do I want to say this? I'm extremely excited for what the last. Can't wait for us to all get to drop that. And get to talk about that in more due diligence. But it looks like Florida State is moving in the exact direction that everybody anticipated, just slower than we thought. Clemson's case has really helped us out with that as well. The ACC spread thin right now. I mean, let's be completely honest. I think you stated earlier in the show that they're catching it from every end. You got 4 different cases going on with just the schools. You got one for each in North Carolina, and you've got 1 in South Carolina, 1 in Florida. But then you've got the Attorney General in Florida that's also coming after them. So that's 5. They have to show up for all of these cases, costing a lot more than what they would have wanted. The expectations was that someone would dismiss at least one of these cases for the ACC, and no one has. Everyone has ruled the opposite. They're stating no. They do have a case. There is a situation to where you haven't shown them this, that, or the other, and they have true merit to what they're asking for. So it's looking good for Florida State and Clemson. Unfortunately, it doesn't look great for the rest of the ACC because they're going to have an issue trying to get out of the conference now, even if we do get out. And nobody's talking about this for some reason. But they agreed with the ACC when they decided to sue Florida State. They all voted to sue Florida State as the ACC. So now they would have to turn around and say, well, no, we were wrong. We want out. It's not going to be that easy because when you made that vote, you pretty much stated that you were happy with where you were, and Florida State was basically crying about it, and they need to be slapped on the wrist. Unfortunately, it's not going that way. Clemson and North Carolina were the only 2 schools that did not vote to sue Florida State. Now, Miami, Pitt, Boston College, Syracuse, down the list, Wake Forest, all of them, they decided to sue Florida State along with the ACC. So I don't think those teams get out anytime soon. If they do get out, it will be sometime later down the road. But fortunate for Florida State and Clemson, they want out. They're getting out. It's just when is the exact question? Like what day are they going to announce it? A lot of people at Florida State here are anticipating that this Board of Trustees meeting, there could be something said. There may be an announcement stating that we're going to leave the conference without all this being settled up front. Will that be to the base knowledge? Nothing in court has been said, but that doesn't mean that stuff behind closed doors haven't been said. But I think Florida State's they're going to leave the conference regardless of what the rulings are, regardless of what that cost is going to be. They know it's time to go, so they will. And I will say this, kudos to Clemson. They've done a phenomenal job in the courts. I think that they're doing extremely well. They do get, and I like the fact that they give Florida State a lot of credit for helping them as far as what not to go after, and what it made their case clean. And I think that was, these two teams have been working together for a minute, and people didn't want to talk about that, and that's fine. But when this all first started, I said, don't think that Florida State's doing this all alone. There's too many people that are calling and helping and stating this and stating that. So just get ready. Now, North Carolina, what a lot of people aren't talking about is there's a lot of research that's been going on law-wise from North Carolina into the ACC. So I don't know if North Carolina ever has to pop off a case. They necessarily don't, because how well Clemson's case is going and the rumors of the settlement coming out of Florida for Florida State. I don't know if North Carolina, if it's necessary for them to even do anything besides sit back and wait, because they, again, did not vote to sue Florida State. So they are pretty much free and clear. So exactly what's going on in Florida State as far as the courts and stuff go, we get told probably too much. I'm surprised that some haven't dropped the news, but I'm happy that no one has, because there's a time and place for it. The day that we all heard what was going on, it's just not the time and place yet. Let Florida State do their due diligence. Let them do their job the way that they need to, so it doesn't become in question of what's going on. Blah blah blah. Too many people know too much. Y'all talk too much. Whatever that situation of smear mud on Florida State's not good. So luckily, everyone media wise that's heard what they've heard. Confirmation wise, some would probably question their resources, and that's fine. I don't question mine, because they've told me this for 2 years now, and we've done nothing but what he has told me we were doing. So I'm going to keep running with that guy. Plus, he's pretty important to the school, so I think I'm going to listen to him until he tells me, Chris, go ahead, say what you got to say. I'm gonna keep it as vague as I possibly can.
So in turn, we're going to listen to you then, Chris. You listen to your guy, and you speak the good word, and then we'll listen to you, and we always have. So as I've always often said, I know where to spot talent. So we've been good friends with Chris for quite some time, and he helps us out considerably on our Florida State show. And so you made a point that I think's a critical one here with the ACC vote and what that told us about them all siding with the ACC, because I had been talking up to that point very heavily on the side of, it's going to be intriguing to me to see those schools in the ACC, not Syracuse, Boston College, Wake, because they're going to fight like hell to save the ACC because they don't have a landing spot. But that middle tier of the ACC, how difficult a spot that they are in to determine the tea leaves. Can we hold this conference together? Therefore, we're going to fight for this conference, or we're going to bail because it's imploding and we can't save it. And we got to find, and we think we've got a good landing spot somewhere. And so I thought that was rather telling and maybe a bit surprising.
Yeah, my question is the Big 12 the one that is guilty of this crazy marketing deal or whatever it is that they just did? If it's not the Big 12, then correct me, but there was some brand that came in and sponsored the entire conference or something to that
Yes,
nature.
well, that's what they're in talks to do. Yes.
Yeah, so my question is then what is the Big 12 conference really worth if they do go through with that? Like, a lot of people state that as signing your death warrant almost. I mean, I'm not sure. I haven't done the numbers, don't know the numbers. So my question comes in, I see a lot of people say that the ACC just needs to combine with the Big 12 and yada. I don't think the ACC, if the Big 12 does go through with the sponsorship deal, I don't think the ACC is going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. That's just something that would neglect them wanting to be a portion or a part of trying to figure out. And that's just one aspect of it. Who runs the conference? How does this work exactly if you combine those two conferences? Someone's got to be in control. Like, where people say that they're just going to mesh together and for the greater good.
Yeah.
This is all about power. So I don't see that. I don't see how they could mesh and come together. I think the ACC can stay a conference. It's just have fun in basketball. Like, it's not going to be a football conference it's so hard to recruit in the ACC conference already. When you see Florida State, Miami, which Miami's doing a good job now, but when you see Clemson starting, when everybody has a little bit of a problem when it comes to recruiting because of, I think what happened last year really hurt this conference, and that could be the bias in me. But with Florida State not getting in, going 13-0, that looks really bad for that conference because a lot of these young recruits are asking that question. Well, why should we? It's not Florida State like this brand. We know they say it. We know the brand's not a problem, so they just don't respect the conference that you're in. And if these young men wasn't saying those things without being, coerced to say that, like they're just clearly stating what they see from the outside in, it's a big question mark. So I will say that a lot of the recruits that Florida State and Clemson are being able to hold on to or even get attracted to the school, it's like, hey, before you ever leave, we'll be out of here. So don't worry about that. And I think that that's really helping and that's why Florida State and Clemson are after this as fast as they are, because I believe the gentleman from Pitt was correct. NIL definitely sped this up. I will never doubt that. Where a lot of people say, well, how do these two correlate? In every possible way when there's money. All money follows money, and it all correlates with each other. So I really don't want to see the Pitts, the NC States, and all. I'm not looking for a downfall for anybody, because I think with NC State, like the gentleman that was on right before me, they have done really well for themselves over the past 7 to 8 years. To get their name up and to be respected as a football program the way that I think they should be, maybe more so than they even are, because they do play a pretty tough schedule as far as ACC schedule goes. They don't shy away from those schedules like some other ACC schools. So I give NC State a lot of credit because they've got this mentality that, well, if we want to win this conference, we have to beat everybody anyway. So we're going to do what we got to do. Huge respect to what their coach has done. Huge respect to what the whole thing's done. The only person I don't like is Boo Corrigan, and that's for obvious reasons. But one bad apple, and that has nothing to do with the football program and what it's done. I think the NC States have a place, and that's based off of multiple reasons, not just football. Now, obviously, if football is good, then you have a lot better chances of the Power 2 wanting a piece of you. But the issue is I can see the NC States, even the Miamis, the I don't want to name anybody else really. NC State, Miami, I can see them coming to the Big Ten. The issue, or the SEC, the issue is going to be is both of those conferences are going to offer them a 50% share. They will not offer them a 100% share. And that's coming from people way above me. That's from a situation that we got into with back in the ACC meetings, and also in I've been to Chicago a few times around the Big Ten situation. So I'm going to be honest with people. No one's going to offer a lot of these ACC schools a full share outside of the Big 12.
Well,
So
as you will know, Chris, the likes of Oregon and Washington have a 50% share.
Right. So there's no way that NC that's exactly the point. Like, and the only reason, like, a lot of people are like, well, you can't say that Oregon, like, well, that means Florida State's only going to. No. Here's why. Because Florida State, in all sports right now, as far as the ACC goes, they are leading in every sport except for men's basketball. You just won a national championship in women's soccer. You just was in the College World Series with baseball, which last year we were terrible, and that big of a turnaround that quick. Our football team for the past 2 seasons has really amped up to what Florida State used to be. And then our women's softball finds a way into the College World Series almost every year. Our last one winning back, I think it was 2018. So it's just the relevance plus what they've done academically. Like what Coach Norvell, what Coach Penske, and Penske is the soccer coach, and what Link has done. Like our entire athletic program, this is the highest GPA that our teams have put out ever. 2 years in a row. He is literally 3 points, as far as Mike Norvell goes, he's 3 points from a perfect score. Now, it's huge kudos to the young men and women that are doing this, but for them to prioritize their studies the way that these coaches have, it means a lot. So that's very applicable and wanted at the Big Ten and also the SEC. So there's a lot of standouts at Florida State right now that goes, well, yeah, we have to. They're doing this better than this SEC team. They're doing this better than that Big Ten team, however many that is. But I'm not saying that Oregon's not a big brand in football or even in basketball. I won't say that they're not. It's just there is a difference. National championships, things to that nature, those matter at some point, and that's just on the football side. The biggest thing that Florida State's got going for them is everybody that wants to invest in the university, and it's a public university, so it's not the easiest thing to invest in. But you have a lot of third parties that are out here saying, well, we want to do this for the medical research. We want to do this for the engineering research. It's just there's a lot of money being talked about at Florida State for the past 5 years, and now some of that money's coming through, and then more so's to come. So we're very attractive right now. We're a very pretty girl in prom. It's just what it is, and this is our time. So I mean, we need to be. We don't need to show up, all jacked up in our pajamas, and we're not. So it's working out the way that it's working out. And I'm very proud of this university. I'm proud of President McCullough from the hires that he's made. Very proud of Athletic Director Michael Alford. We thought our soccer team was doomed when we lost that coach. And he brought in Penske from Tennessee, and right away he goes win the national championship in the second year. That doesn't happen at most places. You go and hire Link Jarrett, which is a guy that played under Mike Martin. He turns around and in 2 years, first year we barely won 20 games. The second year we've more than doubled that in the College World Series, fighting the best team in the country. So to do that in 2 years, Mike Norvell took 3, and that's fine. But it is what it is, and I think what Florida State has proven on the aspects of academics, being a top, I think they moved to 15 or 14 this year. They were 19 last year, top public universities. Now they're like 14, something to that nature. That you're steadily going up, and the questions are getting answered. Like the Big Ten's got this question, the SEC's got that question. Well, when you start checking all their boxes and then some, and you're showing no fallback, you're showing nothing but climb, and you're continuing to climb to those goals and surpass those goals. It's really attractive to these bigger conferences of the Power 2. So I don't see Florida State having the issues that others do, and that could be just bias, but there is a lot of research that's went into that outside of bias. I think that we've done our due diligence on finding out why Florida State's important to each conference. And I will say this, where a lot of Florida State fans want to go to the SEC, I don't care where we go, but I'm telling you we're way more valuable to the Big Ten. It's a much more value, not just for us, but the Big Ten will value us much higher than the SEC can. They've already got a Florida school. It's the flagship school of the state. So the Big Ten backs us. We're going to be knocking on the door for that flagship because that's what we're looking for. So I look forward to it.
You mentioned and went down some of the accomplishments of Michael Alford, and I was going to bring him up before you started to touch on some of these things, because it can't be a coincidence that the two aspects of the role of athletic director that come to mind for me for the typical athletic director is fundraising and hiring. You have to be able to identify talent and leadership abilities and make good hires, and you have to be able to fundraise in whatever manner you can get that done. On top of his plate is obviously litigation and his preparation going into the job that you've outlined many times for us in a very eloquent way of how he prepared this program to fight the ACC and did it from day one. And even in a sense, before he even got the job, he was preparing to do that. And so then he steps on campus and all these teams start to win. So it's been pretty remarkable what he's accomplished.
Yeah, Michael Alford's my guy. So, and Mrs. Alford with her cookies is, I know that sounds bad, but that's what she does. The whole school knows her for it, not just Chris. So she's done a phenomenal job. A huge support system to him. He had to go through a surgery about a month or so ago, and she did an amazing job helping him with everything, not just being a wife, not just with a caretaker. She took a lot of things on her plate, and she knocked them out like they didn't exist. So very proud of what both Mr. and Miss Alford have done. But yeah, from day one, I mean, Alford got brought in. He was the president of the Boosters Club for Florida State. Before that, he had worked at the Dallas Cowboys. Before that, he was at a smaller Michigan school. And his ability to raise money is like no one else that we've had, especially at Florida State. I would put that in the upper echelons of like the Michigans, the Ohio States, and they're able to raise money pretty well. The SMUs, I mean, SMU just raised $159 million, and that's saying something. That's huge. They've never had a problem with money at SMU, but they're doing a phenomenal job. But Alford has brought so much to the table. Of no, this is how you get it done. Yes, you have to spend money to make money, and that's what Florida State's been showing. Like with the renovations, with the standalone facility, with the new hospital, just there's a lot of money getting spent, and it's crazy because these things aren't built yet, and Florida State's already banking revenue off of it. They're already making money on something they don't even have built, and that's something that he set up the way he designed it. The correlation between students and professors to other schools. There's a lot of information getting shared. And then they ask, well, how do you do research? Well, we have other hospitals that are allowing us to do the research within those until ours is done. Our engineering department has tremendously grown. It would be one thing if just our athletics was good. Fine, he's doing a good job as the athletic director. But the moves that Florida State has made in the guidance of Mr. McCullough and Alford, there's growth everywhere. I mean, we have the largest magnet in the world that we do research with, and that wasn't making Florida State the money that it could. And they were like, "Oh no, we've got every possible grant, every possible research." They didn't, because Alford found 37 or 38 more of them, and it brought even more money to Florida State. Just finding those opportunities for Florida State to share their information with these other universities that are doing similar research. I forget exactly what it did with Ohio State, but Ohio State and Florida State together found some amazing magnetic thing or something. I don't know exactly what it was. I'd have to read about it. But because of Alford, because of President McCullough, because the administration trusts in these two, they went all in. And that's what Florida State has done over the past couple of years. They went all in, and so far, everything that Michael Alford and President McCullough have put their fingers on has turned to gold. So you don't stop riding that. Even if one fails, I think you continue to trust these guys because they haven't missed. President McCullough, let me rewind. The administration's office, we're speaking very highly of President McCullough and extremely high of Alford, and that was their words. They've got thumbs of gold. Every time they tell us to do something, we do it. It turns into this X amount of money, X amount of research, X amount of more full rides to the school, etc. So just our allotment has completely changed. We've got more students in Florida State than we have in like 20 years. It's a little bit of insanity because we won a national championship under Jimbo Fisher, and we weren't doing as well as a university then as we are now, and we haven't won one yet as far as in football goes. Baseball was doing pretty good. Men's basketball was doing pretty good in that year, and the years that Jimbo was here as well. So for us to turn around, and we weren't doing as good as we are now, and we were actually doing better on the field if you base it off of championships and relevancy at those times where we were at our highest. So really, really proud of what Michael Alford and President McCullough has done.
Chris Frazier, Spiratics. It's one click away. As soon as you get done here, folks, check out Chris's work on Spiratics. Before we let you go, Chris, if you've got a second, 2025 recruiting, what is the latest?
Well, for the first time in history, Florida State will have 3 offensive linemen that are 5 stars on campus at the same time. Have we ever had 3 5-star offensive linemen? Yes, but have we ever had them on campus at the same time? No. It's just never worked out. All the Bobby Bowden years, all the Jimbo years, it's never worked out to where we've had 3 5-star offensive linemen on campus at once. Well, we'll have Ty Haywood, we'll have Solomon, and we'll have Josh Petty. all at the same time on campus for their official visits. Plus, there's 4 more 4-stars that I think 3 of those 4 will end up being 5-stars before it's all said and done. Florida State has a big opportunity to get a lot of big men in the trenches, not only on the offense, but also on the defense. We've got a couple of guys that have, and some guys that are about to decommit from other schools that they've been committed to, that will be on campus on the 21st to the 23rd. 23rd, I think there's going to be a lot of amp. There's going to be a lot of commitment. Maybe only one, but there's going to be like a domino effect that started. Hayes Fawcett posted something, which is, I think everybody knows who that is. They should. But Hayes Fawcett posted a row of dominoes falling. I asked just to want to know, hey, are you talking about Florida State? Because that's what I think is about to happen with us. I got told to hush. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Don't say nothing about it. Okay, well, now that came out, it's not that big of a deal anymore. But at the time, it's just we as graphic makers, which I'm not anywhere near as good as Hayes Fawcett is by any means, but we still like putting out our own graphics. So we have to know ahead of time who's coming. The only way that you get to know that is you keep all of these secrets until the young man says, okay, this is what date I'm doing it. This is what time I want you to drop it, blah, blah, blah. So we create the graphic. We show them the graphic. If they're pleased with it, that's the one we'll use, the date and time that they tell us to. And that's just how it goes. So Florida State's about to have a huge July. There's going to be a lot of fireworks in July, which is the perfect time for it. So we've got we're even doing really good in the 26 class. For some reason, Mike will not let go of having a quarterback first. He did it with Brock Glenn. He did it with Tate Rodemaker, then Brock Glenn. He did it with Luke Cromenhawk. Now he's doing it with Tramel Jones. And now this 2026 kid, that he makes sure that he gets his quarterback first, which that's what he prioritizes. That's cool. We had a problem with getting a quarterback, period, for like 8 years. We couldn't get one, especially a highly touted one. So he's already got the 26 guy lined up, wondering exactly what day he's committing, but it's supposed to be soon. And usually our quarterbacks stay committed for a year or so. Luke Cromenhawk did. Brock Glenn did. Unfortunately, Tate Rodemaker couldn't because Mike came in, then he had to come in right behind him. But truth of the matter is Mike's doing a phenomenal job on the quarterback, and Tony Tokarts obviously is killing it for us at the quarterback position. But the offensive line has been in question for 2 years now because we haven't recruited that position probably where we want to be. We've been relying on the portal. Except for 2022, that's when Atkins had 6 of them commit. But outside of that, we haven't done too well in the trenches. Right now, Odell Higgins, which is someone that a lot of the Florida State fans get after for defensive tackle, he's doing a phenomenal job with 2 5-stars right now, 2 4-stars as well. So I know we're going to land a couple of them, period. The offensive line could be one of the top offensive lines in the country if they land 2 of the – they've already got 1 5-star landed in Solomon Thomas. They're trying to get 2 more, in particular, those that are coming to campus this weekend. And then you've got a lot of 4-stars behind that Atkins is sending what he did in 2022, and I think it's going to work. And then your DB situation with Pat Surtain, that was one of the best hires that Mike Norvell's ever made. So I think that everybody's doing a phenomenal job, and I think it'll be a great recruiting weekend for Florida State.
Chris Frazier, Spear Addicts. It's 1 click away right here on YouTube. Catch Chris on a regular basis there at Spear Addicts. And once again, the show times and days, Chris.
Mondays and Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do one last Monday. I got hung up in traffic coming back from Tallahassee. But we will be doing one tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be based all on recruiting and also what was said at the Board of Trustees meeting here shortly today. It's about to come up.
Chris, appreciate you stepping by. I know that you're running around 100 miles an hour, so thanks for stopping for us.
Yes, sir, Mark. Appreciate you for having me.
Chris helps headline our Florida State show each and every Wednesday at 6 Eastern, which we had to switch up this week. So be looking out for the Florida State show. That's going to be Friday at 6 Eastern over on the Seminoles channel. We've got a deep dive coming up with Tony Altimore. That's coming up during our Big Ten live show as well. So Friday's going to be a huge day here at the Voice of College Football with a deep dive Big Ten. We're going to focus on Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA. If you're not familiar with the deep dive process, I'm not going to explain it here, but we're going live. Check it out. It's well worth the time, well worth the look. Tony Altimore joins us Friday, 7 Eastern time right here. That is preceded by Florida State Seminoles live here at the Voice of College Football at 6 Eastern. Later that night at 10 Eastern, the USC call-in show with Tim and with Matt. And I know Joey's got a show on Friday night. He's got a show just about every night on the West Virginia channel at some point. But we post the schedule every day on the community page right here. I noticed yesterday that about 60% of the people that watch us are not subscribed. So please subscribe here at the Voice of College Football. We are going to now, in addition to taking your calls, are going to check out a few of the sites online that are speaking directly to the ACC situation here in the last 24 hours. So we're going to check out those sites in 2 minutes. But first, we are going to hear from our sponsor. Love what I do as a sports commentator. I have definitely been blessed. I enjoy my career. But I got to say, if I could turn back time, I would learn the business side of sports management, how to manage people, how to manage projects, how to manage situations. And then there's also those times in which you feel stuck in a job, stuck in a career, just feeling that there's a dead end and wondering and waiting, when is that break going to happen? Well, unfortunately, I got to tell you, that break is not coming unless you make it happen. Sports is your passion. You love it, you live it, you breathe it. Why not make your passion your career? Introducing Southern New Hampshire University, our sponsor. At SNHU, you will learn the business side of sports, sports management principles, and how to gather and analyze data. This degree will help you prepare for a career as an athletic director, sports information director, marketing manager, and other exciting roles in the sports industry. You'll be able to tap into SNHU's network of graduates working in sports-related organizations. You'll also have the opportunity to take advantage of an internship or an experiential learning course within the field. Your courses are taught by faculty with real-world experience, so you'll have opportunities to connect with people in the industry. And when you graduate, SNHU will be right there to help you with your job search. SNHU is accredited, nonprofit, and has radically affordable tuition. SNHU was voted one of the country's most innovative universities by U.S. News and World Report. Just go to snhu.edu/VOCFB. The link's also in my description section down below to see if you qualify for SNHU's sports management program. You might be eligible for financial aid or have existing college credits that could fast-track your degree at SNHU. Click the link to get started. Your exciting sports management degree at SNHU awaits you. Do it now. Appreciate y'all being here at the Voice of College Football. We continue with our look at the ACC and its possible imminent doom. And when we mean imminent, the timeline may have been expedited here in recent days. We're going to talk about 12 angle as well. And when you don't know something and you want to find it out, you go to the mafia. The mafia usually knows what's going on. They know because they're definitely pulling the trigger. But we go to the Big 12 mafia here. We got Nathan on the line. Nathan, it's good to see you.
Thanks for the invitation, Mark. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. You definitely on a regular basis track this. You've got insight into the Big 12 angle, of course, and then even beyond that. So what have you heard just over the last 24 to 48 hours that has possibly expedited this implosion of the ACC?
Well, you're getting a lot of people nervous. There's a lot of schools that are now looking around saying maybe this thing we built up, this ACC conference that's been around for decades, may not be as stable as it once was. North Carolina now is currently in legislation talks about possibly changing their laws so that if they can separate themselves from North Carolina State, it's almost a foregone conclusion. They're going to go somewhere else. And if North Carolina leaves, the ACC falls. Clemson and Florida State, obviously, they're in legal trouble right now. I personally think that the Florida State judge might be moving that charge in Florida, might be moving that course ahead faster from the North Carolina and the ACC charge in North Carolina State. So there's just a lot of things that are looking at it that it makes it look a lot less stable. It's also interesting. We've had third-party talks, people at Louisville. Certainly, there's been some reach out from Pitt and Virginia Tech. I don't know about North Carolina State yet, but and then you have the wild card is Miami. Who knows where Miami might go? They're a private school; they can make all kinds of choices that others can't, but they don't want to be left behind either. So it's just there's too many. What do we want to call them? Too many markers out there to say that it's just going to be okay and we're going to turn the page to the next year and there's not going to be any trouble. I think there's real issues with the ESPN contract coming up in February and whether they re-up or they decide that they're going to renegotiate that deal. So I don't know that there's anything imminent like in the next 2 or 3 days, but certainly there's enough out there to understand that the overall picture for the ACC is not good.
So Nathan, when you look at these commodities in the ACC, how would you rate and evaluate each one based on football, media prowess, academic institution, everything involved, relationships, as you look at the ACC?
Yeah, so we've done several studies, right? We've had multiple shows over what's going on let's talk about the top four. First of all, Florida State is the first one to sue to get out. Their media value is the very tip top of the ACC. They're going to pretty much be able to go wherever they want, but as the time goes, their value might be coming down. They might not get a full share to join. North Carolina is the next one that we would want to talk about, and they're wanted by both the SEC and the Big Ten. So their value is quite high as well. I think more with them, you get into North Carolina, which the demographics are growing. The rest of the country is kind of going down. John Wilner put out an article a few days ago saying that's kind of the problem that's happening in college football right now is that these conferences are losing students. The birth rate's down in the United States. We're not bringing in as many people, and that's a big problem for big-time college football. So North Carolina demographics are good, and so I think the everything's pointing up with that for sure. Then we'll go to Clemson. Clemson's TV value is very high. I'm not sure where they would rank in the priority level. In my opinion, I think Clemson is more valuable for the Big Ten than the SEC. I still don't know why the SEC would double up in South Carolina. Demographics there are not like they are in North Carolina. So that one I'm a little bit out on a little bit. I'm not sure that they have a spot in the SEC. So if they don't get into the Big Ten, Clemson might have some troubles. I'm not predicting the future. I'm not telling Clemson. I don't want to see a bunch of DMs in my Twitter feed that basically say I'm down on Clemson. I think Clemson's a huge property, but is it going to be enough for the SEC to also want them? Maybe, but I am not 100% sure on that. And the last one is Miami. Miami is a football brand first and foremost. Everybody knows that. There's been these articles the last week and a half or so that say should Miami just fold all sports? That's ridiculous in my opinion. Miami's a huge brand. They're definitely wanted. But again, are they wanted in both the SEC and the Big Ten? I don't know. If these schools aren't wanted in both the SEC and the Big Ten, then their value for negotiation goes down considerably. So, in my opinion, those are the four that are most wanted, and then we can go down the line if you'd like and go through the others. But those are the ones that we talk about most often.
Well, Nathan, let's backtrack to Florida State, because you made the point that obviously, if we look at the status of the football program historically, if we look at the current state of the program, if we look at the eyeballs, looking at the TV sets and the streaming, then Florida State's number one, and that's clear. However, you mentioned that as this process continues, that their value goes down a little bit. Is that simply because they're in a desperate situation and they've got to get out? And so obviously, if you're in any negotiating situation and the negotiating partner has no options, or maybe only one other option, then you've got them in a good place.
Right. That is the problem. I was talking about this last night. I'm not sure if I did it on air, but I firmly believe that if Florida State was able to get out in January, February of this year, they would have been a full share member, and I think they were wanted by both the SEC and the Big Ten. As the lawsuit has progressed, and we found out more about the way Florida State does business, I think there's some concerns. Maybe there's political issues at Florida. Maybe they have people that aren't liked in one corner of the world or the other, and so that value may have come down. Also, you have the issue with Florida State and the SEC. They haven't always played well together, right? Florida State was originally an independent brand. Bobby Bowden famously said, "We're not going to the SEC. We'd much rather be in the ACC." So there's long-standing issues that go with that part, and then that negotiation then would go down. The Big Ten's not dumb. They just got Oregon and Washington at half rate, so they got 2 for 1. I could totally see them doing the exact same thing with a Clemson, Florida State, UNC, even a Miami. So, in my opinion, the longer this goes, while the negotiating power for Florida State to get out of the ACC might not go down by itself, the value out in college football land, the TV revenue that is associated with it, might not carry forward. They might only go in as a half share, because why pay more if you can pay less?
So, as a now well-established Big 12 guy, because your beloved BYU football team, of course,
Right.
entering a second season in the Big 12,
Right.
what we view as is common in college football in regards to relationships and conferences is completely different than what it was. Really, nothing's off the board. As
Right.
long as you've got the value, it doesn't matter coast to coast, whatever it is
Yes.
going to take place. So there is no real relationship, maybe outside of West Virginia, having ties to Virginia Tech and a rivalry there, and Pitt and so forth. But in regards to the core of the Big 12, little connection to these schools, if anything. However, when you look at it, other than, let's say, for BYU or for any particular schools that you review in the Big 12,
Right.
other than just wanting to add value to the conference to make the conference itself as valuable as possible, are there any angles that any of these schools have to wanting any particular members in coming in from the ACC than others?
Well, sure. I mean, Brett Yormark's looking at the Eastern time zone for sure. Louisville, I'm not sure if they're Central or Eastern, but they're at the top of the list if Miami's off the board. So Louisville, Virginia Tech, obviously regional for West Virginia. Pitt, another regional get for West Virginia. Look, West Virginia's been out there for over a decade by themselves, and they've needed help for a while. So I think that would be something that would help solidify that area. And then you have Georgia Tech and North Carolina State. I personally think North Carolina State's a better pick. But Georgia Tech is also a very good brand. There's no reason they couldn't come in. You bring up a really good issue, though. Why these schools and why bring them into the Big 12 at all, right? It's addition by subtraction. At the end of the day, the Big 12 needs to be as strong as it can to make itself the third conference. Eventually, in my opinion, and I've said this for a long time, I think we're going to end up with 3 super conferences. The 2 that are going to have all the value are going to be the SEC and the Big Ten. And then there's going to be a third conference that is going to be the best of the rest. And that best of the rest conference could be 20 or 24 schools. And it's the schools that simply don't carry enough value to get into the other two conferences. And in doing so, you cover roughly 72 schools. That's just over half of all Division I football. And that solidifies against a lot of things, lawsuits with antitrust issues, collaboration that was done off the books that maybe some people want to sue to get into. I think if they cover between 60 and 72 schools in one sort of division, that would take care of all lawsuits and everything else that might come along, and that would put us forward for the next 5 to 10 years until we get to that next piece of realignment that everybody knows will eventually come. So in my opinion, the Big 12 needs to have a addition by bringing in those and fortifying with those 4 to 6 schools, maybe 8 schools, but I don't think so. So 4 schools to the Big 12, go to 20, and then sit still.
So Nathan, to set you up for some comments on Brett Yormark, I'm going to state it this way because a lot of Big 12 fans have called me a hater for either just because if there's anything negative stated about the Big 12, they don't want to hear it, or because they're not listening to my complete explanation. And it's been this, that I love the Big 12 as a football conference. I love the competitive nature of the top to bottom, that unlike the Big 10 in the last 10 or 15 years where you basically circle the calendar to watch 3 games and the rest of it doesn't matter because they've got no chance. It's exciting. It's competitive. It's balanced, all those things. I love these football brands. I've been watching them since I was a little kid, all of that. It is clear by the data and the revenue distribution, though, as you just stated, that it's not on par currently with the Big 10 or the SEC and won't be going into the future. That just can't be debated. Look at the TV contracts and the playoff distribution, where throughout the history of college football, these conferences have always dealt with each other on even terms, meaning we're all involved in this. We split the revenue. This is the first time that there's been an unequal distribution. So my question to you, and maybe it's more of just kind of your feel for where Brett Yormark is. I have been going back to Bob Bowlesby and him making the moves on UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, and BYU, and those being the moves that, I posted a video before they even got those 4 schools to say, those are the 4 schools that you go get.
Right.
That I think they've done everything extremely well. The thought process about possibly expanding in basketball, Gonzaga, Connecticut, because it's arguably the best basketball conference, and you could lay claim to that. But it's just, I have found it a bit amusing, some of the comments that Yormark has made in recent months, where I know he's got to put on a front of, we are confident, we're on equal footing, we're the same, we're relevant. But he's just been a little bit over the top, in my estimation, of talking about we've never been as relevant as we are now. And just some things that he has said that I didn't think that he needed to step out to that degree and stated in such ways when the current landscape and the deals that have been struck in recent months speak otherwise.
I think at the end of the day, Brett Yormark's got a job. He's representing right now 16 schools that are fighting for their lives in relevancy. Right now, that's football. And he's doing his job as best as possible. I wouldn't read too much into that stuff. At the end of the day, he is a PR guy. He knows what that messaging means, and it carries quite a bit of value out in social media and on the news. So I don't think it hurts the Big 12 at all for him to be going out there and doing that. Whether it actually brings any additional dollars, I don't know. I have no idea. All I can say is for what the Big 12 was compared to where it is now, it's day and night difference. Basketball's tip top. Everybody knows it. They brought in brands that are winning and getting to the the Sweet 16, getting into the tournament. That's where additional money can come if you're not going to get it in football. And look, everybody in the Big 12, just take a deep breath. It's okay to say out loud, it's the third conference, right? Once Florida State and Clemson leave the ACC, there's no doubt in anybody's mind the Big 12's sitting there in the catbird seat. So just enjoy it. Just breathe deep and say, this is who we are. It's much easier to continue to just sort of go with the flow and enjoy where your schools are at now than to constantly be fighting and putting out, I don't even want to call it negativity to the world about, wow, we want to fight for our relevance. So we want people to respect us. Look, people respect the schools in the Big 12. They just aren't the media darlings that you have to look where the schools are. Honestly, in the Big 12, they're all in the middle of the country, right? Demographics in the United States, all on the edges of the country. So you can't fight numbers. At the end of the day, there's only so many people that live in Oklahoma. There's only so many people that live in Utah. So why even worry about that? Just go out and make the biggest and best brands you can. Put the best teams on the field you can. Keep the focus on football. You mentioned he's been out in the news. That trip to Arizona was very pointed. He basically told Arizona, we love your basketball, but we're a football conference. He's basically putting an alarm bell out to every school in the Big 12, including the ones that might be coming in the future. Football has to be the focus. We're not going to go down the road that the ACC did decades ago, said we're going to be the best basketball conference. Well, the ACC is about to die. Using that as a moniker does nothing. It does nothing because football drives brands. It's 5-1. A 20% value basketball brings to what football brings to an average budget every year. It's ridiculous. The numbers, you just can't fight that type of demographics and money. So let's just absorb what we've got, do the best that we can, and put the best products on the field as possible. The private equity stance, I just want to mention that really quick. That came out in the news, and he's been talking about that for a while now. That's another issue. It's not something that they're going to give. They're going to take a short term, what do they call those, payday loans, and they're going to take that money and put it into a football program to get, or athletic program. Here's your $6 million. They're not going to use that money for that. It's not going to go to the schools to supplement their $22 million to get the best football players they can at their schools. They're going to use private equity for something like a huge purchase, like buying a school out of the ACC contract, by supporting somebody leaving a conference to join the Big 12 to make it the third best conference. That's what they're going to use private equity for. They're not going to use it to just do daily operations. That's ridiculous. Big 12 people aren't stupid, and nobody uses private equity that way. And that's where we're going to really get ahead. Once the Big 12 has 20 or 24 schools, and it's the remainder of the good football brands out of the ACC, it is set. It is set for the next 6 to 10 years, and everybody just sit back and watch some good football.
I'm glad you made that clarification, because to put your faith in 5-star athletes, for as good as they are, and that they comprise the percentage highest of NFL draft selections, 60-some% of them fail.
Right.
So it would be a losing proposition. And the other ones don't move the meter enough to justify that kind of money.
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, private equity, at the end of the day, it is in essence a payday loan. It is something you want to buy right now. You have to buy it, and you're willing to pay up to 20-25% interest for some of this money, but immediately it gives you something, right? And that would be a major purchase, bringing in schools that are basically there to make them so they're going to be there for the long term. And I think that really helps the Big 12 grow. And who knows where the next media deal would be. I really believe that the big media deal has already been made. The Big 10 and the SEC media deals might be the biggest that'll ever happen. I don't see those numbers coming back for quite a while. Money's going other places now. Our entertainment dollar in the United States going other places, and it's not all going to college football like it was maybe 5-6 years ago. So those media deals might not ever be coming back. And in fact, I personally believe the SEC and the Big 10 are going to get closer to the Big 12 than the Big 12 is going to get closer to them.
I would tend to agree with you. And the only data that would fly in our faces would be that somewhat inexplicably, college football TV ratings have gone up the last few seasons.
They have, but the revenue dollars have gone down. More people are watching for less money.
Last question to you, Nathan, concerns this sponsorship deal that's on the table. Not a specific deal, but just the idea of selling the corporate name, the name of the league, and your thoughts about that.
Sure,
that initiative.
sure. BYU needs $3 more million. Go ahead. I don't care. People have asked me, they get that old Big 12 people get upset with me. They're like, why aren't you worried about the brand? Why aren't you know, and to them, they've had it a lot longer for one. I've only had it for 2 years. So I'm not as invested, but honestly, I think it's a stupid thing to argue about. They already do these naming deals in every other league in the world. Premier League, everyone has like 7 sponsors on their jersey. So why do I care what's on a college football jersey? It makes no difference to me. In fact, I hope the Seahawks do more, because they need more money to make that brand better. So I don't care about it at all. I think Yormark's going to get the most out of it that he can. And will SEC and Big Ten eventually do it? Moen, my buddy Moen, contributor and partner Moen, says the Big Ten will never do that. I would never say never. I think eventually the SEC and the Big Ten are going to do it too.
For anyone who would say never to anything, just be aware of what's happened in college football over the last 5 years.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's facetious, right? At the end of the day, everybody knows they can adjust their thing. It's just people are passionate about these things. People are passionate about the Big Ten. People are passionate about the SEC and what they represent. But at the end of the day, it's all about money. Everybody needs to shut up about anything else. It's all about money.
Nathan, we so much appreciate you being here. What's going on over at Big 12 Mafia?
Tomorrow night, we have a members-only show on Miami of Florida. We're going to be talking about where they're going to go and what might happen with them. Join us tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern, and that'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a hoot and a holler. Invite everybody in, and let's talk about where Miami may or may not end up.
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much for jumping on board, Nathan. Good to see you.
You bet. No problem. Have a great day, Mark.
Nathan from Big 12 Mafia. We remind everyone that we go live each and every Tuesday to talk SEC football with you, 11 a.m. Eastern time. And then once SEC Media Days hits, going live every day to talk the SEC. We will have guests galore, top-notch guests, top-notch callers. Right on cue, we've got Adam. Adam, what's going on today?
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing well. What's on your mind?
Great to talk to you. I just had a quick thought. So one of the things I wish we could stop focusing on was money and more on competition. So we have the ACC with 17 teams, the Big 12 with 16 teams, SEC with 16, and the Big 10 with 18 teams. That's 67 teams. Now, out of those teams, we know that some of those teams are never going to have a shot at the playoff or a national championship. Teams like Wake Forest, Vanderbilt, Cal, maybe Iowa State, Kansas. So I would propose that if we have 67 teams, I propose that for the top 335 ranked high school players, we have a college football draft, 5 rounds, and the choices begin based on the rankings in the previous year. That would give each of the 67 teams 5 players in the top 335 high school players, which would probably consist mostly of 4 and 5 stars. That's going to give teams like Wake Forest and Cal and Vanderbilt over time a higher chance to compete. And I think that that's important for college football. And then after the top 335 players, you go back to traditional recruiting. Now, a lot of people would criticize a draft saying, why should we be forcing high school players to go to schools they don't want to go to? But the fact of the matter is we already do. High school players do not go to any school they want. They go where they are recruited. So if LSU, Alabama, and Ole Miss are recruiting you, you don't say, you know what, forget that. I'm going to walk on at Ohio State. So there's already a narrowing of the choices that these that these high school players face. But there is a huge disparity in teams' ability to compete regardless of what conference they're in. So how do you mitigate that while also giving students the freedom to choose where they want to go? Well, like I said, 67 teams, 5 rounds, and they get to choose the top 335 players, giving each of the 67 teams 2 fairly elite players each year and then opening it up to recruiting. I think that would strike a careful balance, and I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, as always, there are facets of that I agree with, so there are proposals that are fantasy land proposals. This would be great if we did this, but it will never happen. But this would be what the unicorn would bring if I had my way. Versus these are realistic proposals. because of what you just mentioned about the draft, I don't think this is a realistic proposal, because you have to completely turn upside down the structure of college football and the legalities concerning college football. And some of that's in process. It is already in the process of, in terms of the pay for play, and moving toward a model in which these players are considered to be paid workers. However, based on everything that's being implemented, they're stopping short of that, and there still is a tie to academics into the school and still obligations there. Whether, I know people chuckle, whether that is circumvented by the school and the football program, that's not the conversation here. It's still in play. I just don't think we are going to get to a place, Adam, where, let's say, the number one player in the nation is a quarterback out of Los Angeles, and we're going to force him to go to Boston College.
Okay, so that's a really great point. And my response to that would be, we wouldn't be forcing him to go to Boston College, because the picks would be the top ranked teams from the year before would get the first choice. Unlike other drafts where the worst teams get the first, the best teams would. So the likely result is that the top players would still be going to teams on the level or with the same elite status that they otherwise might. And because these players don't really get to choose anyway, because they only go where they're recruited, I don't think it would make that much of a difference. And I also think it would bring more parity to college football, because we know Vanderbilt and Wake Forest can never compete for these 5 stars. Well, and so they're perennially in the basement, and that's a fact. And I know it sounds unrealistic, but 25 years ago, would it have sounded realistic to think that we'd be where we are now? I don't think so. And so I think if we want to give meaning to the conferences and give all teams a chance, why not say, for the 67 teams, let's look at the rankings the year before. If LSU was number 1, they get the first pick. It only applies to the top 335 players. After that, the rest of the players, it'll be traditional recruiting. There's got to be some balance to give teams in these conferences a chance, or else we're always going to have Ohio State. We're always going to have, a Georgia. And we're going to have a system where these teams cannot compete. And I think competition is a good thing. And I think if you want to increase revenue, the more competition you have, the better.
And again, this 335 number comes from you wanting to at least guarantee that there are 5 elite or near elite players on each team.
Correct. For the 4 conferences.
Yes. Okay. So if you are the 60th rated player in America, you don't want to be the 60th rated player in America, because right now, if you are the 60th rated player in America, you're coveted by Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia. That you're going to one of those schools. But in your formula, you're doomed to go to one of the worst programs in the country.
Yes, and that's unfortunate, I guess, for some players. But I think you have to balance that against the need to give these schools and these players a chance, because if you do this,
players are the schools a chance, not the players.
I'm sorry, the schools a chance, because
these 330 players, they're going to be well taken care of regardless. They're good to go.
Right, but what I would say,
actually damaging some of their prospects for NFL stardom, because you are sending them to inferior football programs with less resources and coaching ability.
And that's a great point. But over time, these quote unquote inferior schools will not be inferior, because they will be getting players each year that they would not otherwise get. So you will see, 5 top-notch players each year. Now, over the course of 5 years, that would be 25 players. You don't think that those teams at the bottom would start to compete meaningfully with the top teams, therefore increasing the prospects of the players and increasing the competitive value and brand of the school. I know it sounds like a radical proposal, but we didn't think 25 years ago players would be getting $2 million before they even stepped on a college football field or could transfer at will to multiple schools. Because otherwise, if you don't do something, then you're going to have a situation where the bottom schools are always going to be at the bottom. And I think that that's bad for college football. I think one of the reasons why competition is good and why it attracts fans is because everybody has a chance to win. And it may sound, I mean, maybe the system needs tweaking a bit, but you're going to see a Wake Forest and a Cal be more competitive within 5 or 6 years if they have an opportunity to get the players they wouldn't otherwise get. And I will mention this. You have a transfer portal. So that 61st ranked player who's going to go to Wake Forest, they can transfer after a year if they don't want to do that. So it's not like they're locked in forever. But I would submit that over time, they would not want to because all schools, there would be more reasonable parity with the schools. And I think that's a good thing for college football.
I would say that if we look at the last 20 years of college football, there is hardly a school on the map that has not fielded a near top 10 team in that time. Even horrendous programs today, Cal, Stanford, and others, Oregon State, they're not horrendous right this second, but have been able to elevate. So I guess I'm not getting on board with why. Yeah, if we're going to go, I have certainly laid out models to say college football incorporate, be the NFL. If these players want to be employees, then they're going to have to be treated like employees. The NFL is a one big corporation. They've got an office in Buffalo. They've got an office in Jacksonville. That's where they're sending the players. It's just like you get a job at Goodyear and they may send you to the office in Buffalo. They may send you to the office in Jacksonville. But again, I just think that with the academic component involved, that's not going to fly.
Okay, well, then I would like to hear an alternative because what we have now is a situation where Vanderbilt's never going to compete for a playoff spot. And as crazy as people may think this sounds, again, where do current high school players go? They go where they're recruited. Their choices are narrowed inherently by who recruits them, okay? So it's almost like a quasi-draft already. But you have a situation where Georgia's getting a lot of the 5 stars, Ohio State is, Alabama is, but teams like Vanderbilt, Iowa State, Kansas aren't. So if you give them a chance through a draft that's limited to the top 335 players, you're going to have more parity over time. And with the transfer portal, you're not locking these kids in if they really want to leave. But over time, you're going to have more competitive leagues. And I think that that's a good thing for college football because what we have now is games throughout the season where, Ohio State's playing who? Minnesota or Purdue. Who's going to watch that? Who wants to watch that? Or Alabama's playing Vanderbilt. We have to give these teams a chance. And that's why in the NFL, who gets the first pick? Who gets the first pick in the NBA? What's the reason why in the NFL the teams with the worst records get the first pick? Why would the NFL do that?
They're running a business.
Well, we could run a business too with the goal of it being more competitive. And I think that's why you see in the NFL teams that traditionally weren't good rising up over time and having a competitive, at least some competitive parity. And I think for college football, that might be a good thing. And it may not be realistic at this point, but like I said, was NIL realistic 25 years ago? So it's just a thought. I know people might think it's crazy, but I think we have to think outside the box to make college football more competitive across the board and more exciting week to week.
Well, Adam, again, I don't want to misrepresent the options that these players have because you're talking about the top 335 players in America. They have 30 offers apiece from schools. And the only reason they don't have more offers is because those other schools just don't bother. The Wake Forest would love to have the number 1 player in America. They don't offer him because they know they don't have a chance. So why waste our resources and time? So these players, you say that they have limited offers, like they can only go to LSU, Alabama, or Georgia, particular. No, that's what they've narrowed it down to. These players can go almost anywhere they want.
Oh, that's true for a small percentage of the players. But most 3 stars and 4 stars maybe have 12, 13 choices, maybe 14 choices. All I'm saying is that
they've got more choices than that. The number 1 player in America has the choice of every school in America. They just don't get recruited and offered by those schools because they know they don't have a chance.
Well, that's my point. They don't get recruited because the schools know they don't have a chance. And that's why these schools stay at the bottom of their conferences every year. Let's give them a chance.
But if the number 1 player in America wanted to go to Wake Forest and he called up Wake Forest, he would have that opportunity. Wake Forest would say, come on. Absolutely.
Right. So if the number one player in the country wanted to go to Wake Forest and instead had to go to LSU, I'm sorry. Okay.
No,
The
no,
same
that's
holds-
not my point. I think you are, I know that you're way overstating the limitations of these players currently in terms of their options.
Okay. So they have more options, but the reason they don't have more options is because the schools wouldn't try for them, correct?
Yes.
Right. So I'm saying that that's the reason why these schools stay at the bottom of the conference, because they know they're not going to get a 4 and 5 star.
Yes.
So let's give them an opportunity to at least get 5 each year and then open it up to recruiting after the top 335 so that they can have a chance to be competitive in the short and long term. And that's why I say a limited college football draft might be a good idea so that we don't have the same top-heavy conference every year with the same schools dominating and other schools not having a chance.
You don't think that we have a chance for more parity going forward, not to the extent that you're talking about, but Missouri, Washington, those type of fringe schools competing at a high level going forward because of the expanded playoff?
No, I think that they will. No, because I think that the playoff teams that are ranked 6 through 12 in the playoff are rarely going to have a realistic shot at winning.
Oh, that I agree with.
That's why I think the expanded playoff is kind of illusory. It seems like it gives more opportunity, but you're not giving people more opportunity by just including more teams. You're giving people more opportunity by giving more teams the opportunity to compete for the 4 and 5 stars. And if a draft is limited to the top 335, that's not saying the rest of the 4 3 stars in the country can't go wherever they want. It's like a balance between the two so that the Wake Forests, the Iowa States, the Kansases can have a chance. And maybe that sounds radical, but like I said, the players' choices are already limited. Yeah, maybe they could go to any school they want, but the schools that really recruit them are, fairly narrow because the other schools don't think they have a chance. So at the end of the day, you're not giving these schools a chance to really be competitive. And I think that would be a good thing for college football. But if that's not the solution, I would like to hear others to increase parity, because without parity, what are you going to have? I mean, the NFL does, like I said, the NFL does it for a reason. The reason that Bryce Young goes to Carolina instead of the Eagles is because they want to increase competition and give these schools a chance. It's good for business.
I don't think fair. I think what the NFL does obviously works. Almost everything the NFL does has worked for the last 70 years, but I don't agree with it. Why should, because I run a poor football operation, do I get the number 1 pick in the draft? I think it should be completely random. I would make the first round, if our goal is being fair. The NFL is not fair. They're not fair to their best teams and franchises. They're unfair to them. That is completely concocted, that if you win the Super Bowl, you have to draft last. Why? Because you succeeded. You're being penalized for succeeding. I would randomize the first round, and then every other round would play off of how that random selection went to make it a completely balanced selection process.
Well, I think randomization is kind of a middle ground that is a pretty good idea. But if you gave the top teams every year, like say from 2004 to 2012, you gave the Patriots the first pick in every draft, you'd have the same problem that I'm citing right here, which is they'd always be at the top. And you want to have some reasonable parity because people want to see different teams be competitive, and they want to see good games every week. And I think that increases to some degree fairness. But I appreciate you hearing my rather radical proposal, but I think we need to think outside the box in a time when college football, I think, is really being, I don't want to say destroyed, but compromised by the developments in the last 2 years.
And then, Adam, the only other point I have to make is, whose fault is it that Indiana's no good at football when they earn twice as much money in media rights than Utah does? Why are we propping them up?
What players does Indiana have? What players does Indiana have a chance to recruit versus Ohio State? And even versus a Utah or a USC or, well, US or a Oregon?
Well, now we're in the era of paying players, and they have more resources than those schools do outside the Big Ten and the SEC.
Right. And do you think that a player is simply going to go to a poor school simply because they're getting $500,000 more? I don't think that they would. I think they would still go to the top schools. And I think also, again, you're still allowed to recruit. I'm just talking about the top 335 players. That's all I'm saying. Give these lower schools a chance to get 5 good recruits each year. And if the NFL is doing it, doesn't the NBA do it? I mean, they do it for a reason. They're not doing it to penalize good teams. They're doing it to increase parity, because parity is good for the game. It's good for revenue. And people want to see that. And, you know, for anybody who thinks this is a crazy idea, look to professional sports. They're doing the same thing. And I'm not even proposing the same thing as the NFL or the NBA, because I'm saying the draft would be very limited. Something has to be done. Otherwise, what we're going to have now is the top schools buying players, and that's going to be the way it's going to be. And I don't think you're going to see any parity, and you're going to see the same teams winning every year. And in the long term, it's going to destroy the sport, because people aren't going to want to see it anymore. It's going to lead to fatigue. But just my thoughts. I always try to think outside the box and take some risks. So I appreciate you listening to my position, and it's always good to talk to you.
I appreciate it, Adam. Have a good day.
Thanks, Mark. You too.
I think Adam makes some great points. It depends what your goal is, what the purpose. I love fairness. I believe in fairness. I believe in people earning their way, entities earning their way, as long as I don't believe in handouts, unless somebody we're not going to take this into a social commentary, but generally I don't believe in handouts. When we're talking about in this realm, capable people that have resources. So we're not talking about real life situations. We're talking about within a sports realm. Therefore, I believe in rewarding accomplishment and having to earn it. But the rules that you put in play, the structure that you put in play, being fair for everyone. And again, I'll make the point that in the NFL, it's not fair. It's not fair, but I understand their business proposition. Their business intent is to create parity. Pete Rozelle put that in play and stated that very clearly decades ago. We want to create parity in the NFL. Therefore, the worst team in the league artificially gets the first selection. When you really, and everyone, we've just been so indoctrinated to that being fair. That's not fair. That is not fair to the teams that achieve. That the 2-14 team that sucks, that didn't manage their cap correctly, didn't do what they need to do, didn't draft well, that they continue to be handed the top players in the draft. Why? So I'm fighting against that from a fairness position, but in terms of running a business, that's the way that you do it. So that's why I believe that the NFL is certainly well within its right, of course, to do what they want with their business, but that's not the fair way to do it. It's not fair at all. All right, we will keep it rolling here at the Voice of College Football. I have yet to even get to the articles in question that I wanted to get to concerning the ACC, but that's okay. We've had some great guests, and we are now bringing on our second caller. We've got Chris on the line. Hey, Chris.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark. I missed your show. I wasn't here to hear most of it. I just heard the argument presented from the last caller there. Is the question whether or not a team maybe that isn't seated up high in the standings, they won't have the same opportunity, I guess, to win a title? Is that the idea that's being? I didn't catch the show. I'm sorry. I have to.
So the purpose of the show is that the implosion of the ACC and the breaking apart of the ACC may be more imminent than what we thought previously. So that's the impetus of the show. But this last caller took it off into restructuring college football?
I'm kind of the opinion, not that my opinion necessarily matters, but I kind of feel like if it isn't broken, don't fix it. I don't know. All these things to try to make things fair. I don't know who exactly is it going to help. Um, he mentioned Missouri. I guess maybe you did. I don't. They're in a position right now where if they really want to make a charge, I think they can actually probably do it without. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, was it, where they were really rated pretty high? I know they didn't win the SEC, I don't think, but they were in the championship game, and I don't know how much better you can do than that, other than actually win the game, I guess. But I don't really see that there's a huge issue with the way that the sport is actually being managed. I don't like the idea necessarily that, I don't really like the idea that we have to pay the players, but that's a whole nother topic. I just not sure why that's necessary, I guess. But I guess if the people want to do it, I guess that's fine. But
Because it's illegal not to pay them.
well, I don't know that I really. I mean, it's none of my business. In all fairness, I don't participate in it. But do they do something that's so important that they deserve to be paid for it? I don't know. I mean, that's a whole nother subject. But I disagree that. I mean, here's one example, and I've tried to bring it up before, Mark, and I just want your opinion about it. In 1986, is there any question really that Penn State was the national champion in 1986? I mean, it's going to kind of boil down to that. So I just thought I'd ask your question about that.
I have no other, as I review that season in my mind, I have no other candidates for the national championship in 1986.
So it's as simple as going undefeated and beating the best team and the best. That's really all it's about. And I don't quite understand all this idea. Oh, we need a playoff. Well, who decided that we needed a playoff? I'm kind of curious who made that decision, because I've yet to find evidence that a playoff really even makes sense at all. Now, last season, for example, I can understand maybe that Georgia probably should have maybe had an opportunity to get the chance to play maybe Michigan. But in my opinion, the two best teams were played in the championship game, and playoffs just make things a little bit harder to figure out, in my opinion. Okay, yeah, we could have put Georgia in there somewhere, I guess, and probably Florida State, and I'm sure we could probably think of some more teams that maybe. But at the end of the day, to me, it seemed fairly clear to me. Maybe it wasn't as clear to you. I don't know. I can't speak for anybody else. For me, it was as clear as putting Washington and Michigan together in the championship game. And that was before the playoffs. So I don't understand. I still don't understand all this about, well, oh no, we did playoff. That wouldn't have decided. That wouldn't have decided the championship if we'd have put them together in the Rose Bowl. Oh no, there would have been controversy. People have been all pissed off, and whereas in my opinion, that's what all we needed to do, and that would have taken care of the whole year, and that would have ended it, I think, at 14 games. So, yeah, we can extend it out further, 16 games, I guess, but do we really need to? And that's kind of what I'm getting at. In 1986, we could do it in 12 games. Now I guess it takes a couple more games. Maybe further down the road, maybe we'll even take another game. I don't know. But I don't think we need a whole 12-team playoff necessarily to figure everything out. That's the question I have. I don't know if you agree with that.
All right, Chris. I think the burden of proof is more on you to argue and prove why we don't need a playoff as opposed to why we need a playoff, because in every reasonable competitive sports situation, you play a regular season of games that are predetermined to determine the best teams based on their records, first and foremost. Let me finish. And then you take a portion of those teams, whether it's 1/3 of the league or 1/10, whatever the percentage, 8 out of 32, whatever the percentage is of those teams, and then you pit them against each other to play a playoff at the conclusion of the season to determine who wins the games to win a championship. This is a fundamental concept that is understood and proven to be the best way to determine a champion in any sport.
No, I'm going to caveat that a little bit, Mark. And this isn't to cause you grief or anything. You're entitled to your opinion. I'm not even saying you're necessarily wrong. I mean, at the professional level, probably so. I mean, maybe for professional football or for professional, maybe it's almost essential. I don't know. I know it's what they do. So, I mean, I'm not going to say it's wrong. I think in Olympic sports, I'm not sure that it's really necessary in Olympic sports, is it? I mean, I know they have championships and they have kind of a form of a playoff, but it's a little bit different. It's not exactly quite the same, I don't think. And that's all I'm arguing, is that there might be another way to go about it that gives the correct result without having to
There's not a better way to go about it.
Well, I
This
don't
is
know
the
about
best
that.
way to. This is the best way to go about it. I'm not saying that this particular playoff is the best way to go about it, but a playoff tournament is the only way to conclude in a fair way on the field or on the court who the champion is. It's not debatable.
No, I think it is.
It's not debatable.
I think it is.
Now, how those teams are selected, how many of them should be able to participate, all those things are debatable. But the mere fact that it is competitive sports and that you pit the best teams against each other on the field or on the court to determine the best, that can't be debated as the best conclusion.
Okay, well, I actually kind of understand a little bit of what you're trying to tell me, but is that now, at least be honest with me, isn't it partly based, because you've said this before, it doesn't really matter to me, Mark, you're entitled to your opinion, but it's kind of goes back to 1984 when BYU didn't have to play maybe Oklahoma. Is that not at least partly one of the, I mean, they didn't have to play Oklahoma, so there's no evidence to show that they were the best team. They didn't play Oklahoma, so it's unclear, I guess, about who the best team
They
was.
didn't play any of the top 30 or 35 teams in the country, but we're not going to focus this conversation on
I don't
1984.
mean to. It's just that I'm trying to explain to you. If you'll let me, I'll try to explain to you why that doesn't really matter. But you never really let me ever do
You're
it.
telling me that it doesn't matter that a team that we crown as the champion played any of the top 30 teams in the country. That doesn't matter.
I think they played 6 or 7 teams that were real close to being top 40. They played 6 or 7 that were
Not good enough.
So top
I
40.
shouldn't even have to explain that.
Well, I don't know that it really matters. I mean, at some point,
Of course it matters. Of
No, I
course
don't know
it
that does.
matters.
That's what I'm trying to explain to you. I don't know that.
Okay, if I got on here and I said I have the best YouTube show in the universe, okay?
You do.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. But let's say that was my claim. I have the best YouTube show in the universe. However, you're not allowed to watch 90% of the other YouTube channels. I'm going to select for you which ones you watch to compare them to me. You are not allowed to watch these other ones to make that evaluation. Would that be
You know what?
accurate?
That's a fair analysis. You want to know why? And again, if you'll just let me finish my point, you're saying that you have to finish in the top 10% is kind of what you're trying to tell me to be in the show.
You have to, to, as a champion, you have to prove that you have defeated anyone else that has a reasonable claim to the championship, that has championship level credentials.
Okay. Well, I don't know that I really have an issue with that. I think that's probably a fair statement. I agree. I don't know that that's such, but I don't know that that's really necessarily a disqualifier either, though. That's what I mean. You make it like, oh no. One thing I can honestly tell you, and it's not really to prove a point. It's not to disprove your point. The belt, which is something you don't like, which I don't know that I really like it, but it kind of separates the wheat from the tares. All we really have to do, if you want it to down to the simplest, as long as Michigan actually did what they had to do to win a title, now all we really have to do is keep our eye on Michigan. If they finish the season undefeated, they shouldn't have to play 6 or 7 games to prove that they're not, if they can go 12-0 or whatever it is, that's about all anybody can do. I mean, at some point, that's all that really matters, Mark. You don't have to beat
the previous season should have nothing to do with the current season.
Why not?
Because it's a new season. This is not a heavyweight championship. You don't keep your championship belt. We're starting a new season.
Well,
Technically, Stanford, a 3-9 football team last year, has just as much of a shot as anybody else and should to win the national championship.
Right,
we're starting over.
I'll even go with that and say, okay, you're right about that. I do what I do, which I don't know if you really follow it or not, but last season, just so you understand, of course, Washington was a belt champion, but I don't know that that really matters, but they did. Anyway, my first survey, I guess you could call it, after 3 weeks, which is like really, really pretty early, I had them rated number 1. And I think they pretty much held on to that the whole year, except for I do think that Michigan actually at some point, pushed ahead of them. But it's still the same idea. I don't know that we need like 100 teams to decide the championship if it's between 2 teams, no matter who it is. And so, yeah, you can make a point about, oh, we need to include Stanford, we need to include Oklahoma, we need to include everybody, but not if they're not in the top whatever percent that would be at the end of the year. At some point, it doesn't really matter who all we include, does it?
Okay, Chris. So this is another issue I have with what I understand to be your point on a fairly regular basis. We have to have a predetermined system before the season starts.
I think
We
I do.
can't get to the conclusion of the season and say, oh, there's one clear champion. We don't need to play any more games. We'll not play a playoff this year because Georgia's the only undefeated team. So they won the championship. And then we can't get to the next season and say, oh, well, there's about 3 teams that are undefeated and have a claim for the championship. So they're going to have to play each other in some. You have to have a system, and the system has to be
work.
replicated, and it has to be implemented and played out each year.
Well, again, getting back to my point without
You don't just make it up as you go.
Well, I don't know that I am. I mean, I'm just
Yes, you
Penn
are.
State- no, I'm really not. Penn State
Well,
was
and I'm not being critical, Chris. Let me clarify my point is that you, if I'm not mistaken, through our many conversations, point to various years, and then based on the conclusion of the regular season, you say, well, that year they were definitely the champion. This year, those 2 teams should have played. Well, you can't play a football season and then at the end say, oh, let's see, what do we need to do this year? We need to include these teams to play in games to determine the champion, or nobody needs to play because Michigan's number 1. They've won all their games and nobody else has. So we don't even need to play any playoff games. You can't just make it up as you go.
I'm not exactly sure that's what I'm doing, but anyway, just to clarify my point, there was a belt at stake between because it was because the previous season Ohio State had beaten Utah in the Rose Bowl. They carried a belt into the following season, which was 2023, I think. Anyway.
2. Yeah.
Okay. Well, they surrendered it to Michigan, and Michigan surrendered it to Texas Christian. Now, at some point, regardless of what you want to say about it, whether you agree with it or don't, and that's what happened, though. So, I mean, yeah, I think at some point you can say, well, it's whether or not you agree that that's the right way to do it or not is really all it is. And I understand that that doesn't necessarily mean that Texas Christian was best team in the country, but they were the best team maybe to not win a championship. So I don't know. Why is there a huge oh no, they got beat so bad they shouldn't even been in the game. Okay, whatever. Go ahead and make that your point. I don't know that that's really. And really, the other thing I was going to tell you, really the belt, what it really does is it does carry, and that's the whole point of it, is it carries it to. So all it really did was it said that Georgia was the best team moving forward, just like Michigan's the best team moving forward. You can say that, oh no, that doesn't count. That's not. But that's exactly what the belt does. So you can just tell me you don't like it. That's fine. You can't tell me it doesn't work because it works like a charm.
No,
All we have to do is
it
watch-
doesn't, Chris.
Yes, we
It,
did.
it doesn't work.
It does. And all
No,
we
it
have to
doesn't
do-
work.
All we have to do is watch.
Let me make a clear distinction. So somebody, whomever this was that made up this belt championship, I put that in quotes, is simply just taking a novelty. They are creating a novelty and saying, in the boxing world, for example, once you win a championship belt, you keep that belt unless you refuse to box anymore. You keep that belt until somebody defeats you. So that concept, somebody has applied to college football as a novelty.
I know.
It's a novelty thing to keep track of, but it
It
should
is.
not be applied in any reasonable, serious way.
Well,
Because
When-
each season is a different season.
just
There
so
is
you
no
understand, Mark,
carryover.
it's not to contradict you. When Washington beat Texas in what would it have been, the Sugar Bowl, there was a belt. And the reason there was a belt was because Texas, I think, had beaten Oklahoma State. There was a belt, and you can look into it, and you don't have to.
And if we rewatch the game, if we play the game broadcast, Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit are talking about this belt throughout the broadcast. I'm sure that they can't stop talking about this belt and the implications of the belt. It's talked about widely. Yes, it is something that's on the hearts and minds of every college football person.
I don't know that I actually ever said that it was. I'm just telling you, if you want to know how to separate the teams from all we really have to do, and it's not just, in all fairness, it really probably isn't limited to just Michigan. Oregon probably should be up there, right up there. I know Washington would be if they hadn't had to play Michigan, but we won't count them because of the fact that they lost the belt. Alabama really didn't lose to Michigan, so they should probably be in there, and Georgia. So there's at least 4 teams there, right?
Alabama didn't lose to Michigan.
Not in regulation.
Well, they play overtime when the game's
Yeah,
time.
well, that's kind of ticky-tack. Generally, what happens if it
It's
doesn't
not
get
ticky-tack.
Yeah, it is.
See, this is another
Oh, it's fine. You don't want-
illogical point that
you
you
don't want to. If you
consistently
don't want
make,
Alabama,
Chris.
it's fine, Mark. To me, I don't really care
When
because
two teams play a sporting event of any kind, football, baseball, basketball, whatever,
well,
and they have the same number of points at the conclusion of play, you need to
That's fine.
continue to play to figure out who the better team is on that day.
well, at any rate, there was a questionable call at the end of the game, right?
Well, we can go into questionable calls all over the
There
place.
was. I mean, there was a guy that caught the ball and he was tackled in the end zone, and I to this day don't know what actually they gave him. I guess what was it? Maybe you can explain it to me. He caught the ball, so I think the reason it was down was he waved his arm up above his head. If he hadn't done that, I think that might have been a safety, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know.
Okay. Oh, we're talking about a punt. Anyway, Chris, I appreciate you being here. Thank you for the call. And you certainly have a nice day.
You too.
I would choose to summarize some of my points, but I don't think I need to summarize those. I think we all know there has to be a playoff at the end of any season in sports to logically determine the champion. That's the reason we do all this, right? To watch games, to see who the best team is. What I was upset about most during that call was that I didn't spill water. I just must have set, with all the condensation, water on my dark horse selections for the college football playoff notes that I'm going to produce this video later today. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I didn't plan it that way, but 10 dark horses for the college football playoff. And I'm talking about dark horses. I'm not talking about, I see this every year. Penn State's a dark horse. Tennessee's a dark horse. Really? No. Dark horses for the college football playoff. So we will produce that video. Okay. Let's get to these articles from the ACC, or not from the ACC, concerning the ACC. I have not looked at these, so I'm looking at these for the first time myself. And for somebody who commented that Justin's telling me something here. Anyway, somebody had commented that Florida has more than 3 times the population of North Carolina. 22 million, 10 million. That is not more than 3 times the population. I've seen some other folks make some ridiculous comments. I saw somebody comment that Iowa's going to get kicked out of the Big Ten, or should get kicked out of the Big Ten because only 13 people watch their games. Okay. After Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, we will see about the new entries into the Big Ten, but the current Big Ten through 2023, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska, I'm going to take into consideration their horrendous play, that if they were playing decent 8-4, 9-3 football, that their TV ratings would increase substantially. And Wisconsin's right there with Iowa. There's all sorts of teams that you can make fun of not drawing viewers way above Iowa. Iowa's TV ratings are pretty good. So hopefully whoever made that inane comment is still here to hear my response. So let's see what we've got here. This comes from ABC 10. I don't know where they're located. ABC 10, it looks like somewhere in the Northwest. And I guess that's not an article. We don't want to watch their ridiculous report. No, we don't want that. But it had something to do with BYU wants Washington State, Oregon State in the Big 12 via expansion as Clemson spurs ACC realignment. Yeah, the plight of Oregon State and Washington State is going to be intriguing. I've got to say that Duke is one of the more interesting cases in all of this for this reason. Of course, they have one. Thank you, Jackson, ABC 10 out of Sacramento, California. Duke has one component that is unlike any other of these institutions and athletic programs. And of course, we're talking about Duke basketball. Now, without Mike Krzyzewski, we shall see how they are able to sustain their excellence. But Duke is, of course, an outstanding academic institution. But in regards to football, I know that Mike Elko's done a nice job, but he's gone, and they have not ever been able to sustain any kind of football success. The football is not watched on television. It's not watched at the stadium. It is not watched. It is largely ignored, period, even when they've been pretty good. So nobody cares about Duke football. I hate to say that. I don't know that we've run across a Duke football fan here at the Voice of College Football. But the academic and the institution itself, of course, is tiny. They're like 7,000 or 8,000 students. But the component of Duke basketball, they might be able to attach themselves to North Carolina and get somewhere. Is Duke going to be the running mate of North Carolina? Who is North Carolina's partner going to be in all of this? UCLA benefited from its partnership with USC, with its rivalry, with its connection with USC. UCLA definitely benefited from that. Who is going to benefit from their attachment with North Carolina? Because on the surface, NC State seems to be the most reasonable, logical partner with UNC. But Duke has an angle, of course, with the basketball relationship in particular. And then Virginia, as discussed with a couple callers today, with our guy Bill Bender from Sporting News, Virginia's got a connection. Yeah, keep chopping, as just mentioned there in the chat. North Carolina, Virginia, North Carolina, NC State, North Carolina, Duke. Take your pick. So here we go. And this needs to be attributed. This is the Tennessean. And this article was written by Blake Topmeyer and John Adams. Who wants to be in is not the question. Who would the SEC want? That's the question. So, of course, we know about the expansion now to 16. In the 1990s, the SEC swelled from 10 to 12, and then from 12 to 14, of course, now to 16. Realignment paused after last summer's demise of the Pac-12, but the carousel could regain motion if the ACC fractures. Okay. The hosts agree on 3 schools being a fit for the SEC: Florida State, Clemson, and North Carolina. Tom Meyer says UNC might interest the SEC more than any other school. It's a big brand in a growing state. Check out our recent videos. I don't know that we're going to come across any opinions here that we have not already delivered. And Charlotte is home to the SEC network. What about a potential fourth ACC school as an additional expansion target? That's where the conversation gets more complex. And of course, Notre Dame is not a part of the ACC in football, so they should not even be considered. Then we have John Adams' suggestions to put together with Florida State, Clemson, and North Carolina. NC State, number 1. Have the Wolfpack ever looked better? Their men's and women's basketball teams reached the Final Four. NC State baseball made the College World Series. Football is consistently finishing in the top 25. If the SEC wants to add UNC, why not go for a 2-for-1? Miami. The U is not a perfect fit for the SEC, but to get to 20 teams, we might need to stretch traditional thinking. Miami at least enjoyed a period of football dominance. From a football standpoint, I would argue that Miami is still a better product, not on the field, but a better brand overall product than NC State. I would put Miami above NC State. If the Big Ten is to get, or either one of these conferences is to get North Carolina, then they already have a foothold within the state of North Carolina. And NC State is just a good running mate for them for a number of reasons. But to gain a better brand, more eyeballs, and more potential winning, Miami has a much, much greater ceiling than NC State. Look at history, look at recruiting. Virginia Tech's at number 3. Watch a Hokies football game and tell me that could not be an SEC fan base. Adding Virginia Tech would give the SEC another Southern state. Sometimes when people use this term like SEC, he's an SEC player, that's an SEC atmosphere. Like, I get it to a certain extent, but I think it is just well overplayed. So again, back to this comment. Watch a Hokies football game and tell me that couldn't be an SEC fan base. Wisconsin could be an SEC fan base. A whiteout in Happy Valley could be an SEC fan base. And on and on. Iowa could be an SEC fan base. I just think that's a stupid throwaway comment. All right, Duke, number 1. I've previously suggested other schools as the 4th ACC target for the SEC. However, upon reconsideration, I think the SEC should just go for this basketball blue blood if it wants to reach 20. Duke, North Carolina, Kentucky in basketball. Virginia, number 2. Virginia has a horrendous football history. Like Duke, Virginia football would struggle in the SEC. Overall, though, the Cavaliers boast a strong athletic department, and nobody cares about that. So that didn't really gain us too much in regards to yes, I think our conclusion there is not to rely too much on reading other articles because they're not telling us anything that we haven't talked about ad nauseum here, that we have not touched upon. A lot of what you read online, you would think would come from writers that have been working these sports for a long, long time and that they would have intel. But if you watch us on a regular basis, and we have some excellent media people and sports writers here on a regular basis, they don't have an inside line of intel that's anything phenomenal. They are guessing and estimating as well. Okay. They are guessing and estimating as well. So, to summarize, as of 9 months ago, I got to the point with Florida State and Clemson that I believed that they were going to move on to another conference. That was before litigation. There were other factors, there were other indicators out there that I felt as though pushed me to the point to believe that it was a likelihood that Florida State and Clemson were SEC or Big Ten bound. Then they went to litigation, and I certainly believe that once you go down that road, that there is next to no chance of turning back. You have made your decision. There's too much bad blood. There is too much at stake. There is too much money that's been invested, too much time. The reputation you have, if you are Florida State and Clemson, you have done irreparable damage to the ACC brand by what you have stated in the public forum, by the actions you have taken. There is no turning back. Clemson and Florida State are kicking and screaming and fighting on 4 different fronts to get out of the ACC. It's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of cost. Okay, now North Carolina. And from a image standpoint, from a historical standpoint, North Carolina's stance in this is even more important, not on a football point, but historically, brand, image, connection, attachment to the ACC. If there is one school that speaks ACC, when the Pac-12 was the Pac-12, the number one school in the Pac-12 was USC. Even when they were down, even when they weren't, even when Oregon was running high with Chip Kelly, Stanford, other schools could take prominence for a short period of time. But the school that was most important and most attached to the Pac-12 was USC. But that had more to do with USC's dominance, that they worked themselves to that status. They earned that status. You cannot say that about any other school in the country. For as great as Alabama is not the SEC. If Alabama left the SEC tomorrow, it would be a huge blow to the SEC. The SEC would be fine. There's Georgia, LSU, Texas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas A&M, etc. Ohio State is probably the biggest brand in the Big Ten. Probably. But Michigan, of course, can claim that right, that status. Let's just call it a tie. I think that's the most reasonable conclusion based on everything. Not basing that on the 2023 season. I'm basing that on all factors included. Let's call it a tie, a 50-50 split. But therefore, you can't say Ohio State carries the Big Ten or Michigan carries the Big Ten. And certainly nobody else carries the Big Ten if it's not one of those two schools. There is not a school, and not in this sport, but because of where they're located, because of the history, and because of the basketball, Tobacco Road runs through Chapel Hill, North Carolina. There is no other school in the country, I would argue. The Big 12. Kansas State's important to the Big 12 identity. Oklahoma State, Kansas. That is distributed among a number of schools. Those would be the 3 at the top of the line of the Big 12. The Big 12 identity is, now that Oklahoma and Texas are gone, is Kansas, Kansas State, Oklahoma State. When I think Big 12, those are the first 3 schools I think of. But still, again, it's 3 schools. When I think about the ACC, just ACC, the ACC brand, not thinking about who's going to win the ACC, but just think about the ACC brand. So when North Carolina said, we're out of here, we've had enough, we got to make more money, we can't be competitive in this league, that spoke volumes. Florida State only has a 30-year history with this league. North Carolina has a day one history with this league. So, at about 9 months ago, I believed that the ACC would never be the same. And that has obviously continued to move along. But I did not state there will be no more ACC. I didn't know. I still don't know. Because the ACC has fortified itself to a certain degree by adding 3 schools this offseason to run its total to 17. So let's say Florida State and Clemson leave. 12 of these schools in the ACC have sided with the ACC against Florida State and Clemson legally. So that's going to be a difficult decision and vote to separate themselves from. And we will just have to see how anxious the Big 12 is to expansion for schools like whoever gets left out, Virginia Tech, whoever gets left out at the top level, whoever's in the middle that's kind of precarious. Because I'll make this point again, this entire process, what I find the most intriguing, and realignment has not necessarily captivated me like it has a lot of other people in my position over the last 5 years. When it gets hot, when there's news, when there is enough talk out there, we will discuss realignment, and then we will go with a very measured approach at attacking the various angles as I see them. But we don't talk about it every day. But what I have said from the time that I believe that the ACC was, I don't want to say doomed, that the fate of the top of the ACC was sealed, that the ACC would not ever be the same again. Once Florida State and Clemson made their move to go to court, that the ACC would possibly retain its status as a conference, but it was going to have to try to find maybe a Memphis or somebody of that ilk, Tulane, to backfill its conference, much like the Big 12 did. That what intrigues me more than anything else about this is if you are Louisville, NC State, those are the two that come to mind first and foremost, but Georgia Tech, Virginia, because Florida State's safe, Clemson's safe, I believe Miami's safe, and North Carolina. They are coveted. They have places to go. Now, how many options they have remains to be seen. They may have one option, they may have two, they may have three, but all of those schools have options. Virginia Tech, Louisville, NC State, I'm looking at you in particular. I am fascinated because they have to be weighing, they have to be working every back channel to figure out what does the Big Ten think of us? How does the SEC evaluate us? What do we need to do to improve our standing? What do we have to accentuate in our argument? What do we have to do with our TV numbers or our football or our recruiting, whatever it is, to make ourselves more attractive? Because we are teetering on whether we want to fight with the ACC to try to fortify the ACC and reestablish the ACC as a permanent member of Power Conference football, or this league is imploding, it's done, we've got to bail. So they will have to make their decisions. Florida State, more than anyone, has been more out front and outspoken than anyone and has taken the initiative. Clemson has followed, now North Carolina. But for those schools, they will have to show their hand at some point. Are they with the ACC or are they against the ACC and looking for the best angle to exit? Appreciate you being here, the voice of college football. Our next live show, in terms of me, you seeing my smiling face, unless there's breaking news or some other reason that I find to jump on here, would be the Big Ten live shows Friday at 7. We've got Tony Altamore standing by to deliver our deep dive on USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon to the Big Ten. So please join us Friday, 7 Eastern. Deep dive Big Ten, focus on USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. I've got my college football playoff dark horses. Be looking out for that video. Check out my power rankings for all 4 power conferences. And I am also reviewing program rankings. So we did the all-time program rankings per conference, and people have requested that I put that together for an entire program rankings list. So we should do that. But I don't want people to get confused between all-time program rankings, and I am in the process of... Should we spoil it? Let's see what I've got listed here so far. So don't take a screenshot of this. Don't run with this, because what's that? Got all sorts of stuff. I just released here today my opponent's ranking on the Clemson, Florida State, and Miami schedule. So check out those. Those videos are on those channels in which I list top to bottom, most difficult game to least difficult game, and I give a percentage ranking. Where are all the notes I took on these programs? Guess it's here. Is that it? Oh, yeah. All right. So we're working on our 2023 program rankings. Yes, we are working on those. All right. Appreciate y'all being here at the Voice of College Football. Good to see you again. We've got the Big Ten show featuring the deep dive on Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA, Friday at 7 Eastern. The Michigan call-in shows tonight at 8 on the Michigan channel. We've got a Big 12 show as well tonight. And I think that's it. The Clemson show is now moving from Thursday to Friday. More details on that. So much going on here at the Voice of College Football. Keep it locked in, and we will see you next time.